Hi, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 4 of SteamLUG Cast. We're recording this on Friday, the 20th of February, 2015. My name is Cheese, and with me I have Nemoder.
Hey there.
DerRidda.
Hello.
And special guest, Ryan Gordon.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's going to be a pleasure, I am sure. How have you guys been, Nemoder and DerRidda?
Good.
Just fine.
Fantastic. Before we dive on to the main show content, we're going to have a bit of a chat with Ryan about his history and some of the stuff he's worked on. So to start with, do you want to tell us a little bit about your origins, I guess, starting with Loki games and anything before that?
Yeah, sure. So I graduated from college, surprise, would surprise me at least, and I worked in a really, really boring job in the late 1990s where, I was doing the same thing everyone else did, where it was, you were building this Java-based enterprise-level, three-tiered customer management, blah, 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 blah. It was the most boring thing I've ever worked on. I hated it. And there's a company called Loki Games, and they, I read about them all the time on Slashdot back in the day, and I was very excited that someone was making video games for Linux. And they had a contest called Loki Hack, and they came to the Atlanta Linux Showcase. And I lived in Charlotte, and Atlanta's about 4 hours drive from there, so I drove down there, and I took part in this Loki Hack competition. They gave you the source code to a video game. They gave you Civilization Call to Power, which was new and awesome at the time. It's still awesome. It's just not new anymore. And basically, they locked you in a room for 48 hours and said, do whatever you want to the game. Here's the source code. They set up a gigantic, it was probably like a 2-core CPU at the time, which was like mind-blowingly powerful. And they're like, there's your build box. Everyone can build on that. And, when you have 24 people building on the same 2 cores all at once, some massive C++ project, we kept crashing the build box. But basically, the goal of this thing was just build whatever you want. If it's interesting, we're going to give out prizes to the people that had the most interesting changes to the game. And a couple of people did some very interesting things, and some did less interesting things like me. But what they were really looking for there was programming talent, and they offered a couple of the people that were at that competition jobs, and one of them was me. So I quit my job and got in my car, and I drove from North Carolina to California. It's a very long drive. I don't recommend it. Take a plane if you have the option. And when I got there, they gave me a job at Loki, porting games to Linux, and it kind of spiraled out of control from there.
That is quite the backstory now. You just have blown our pants off. I mean...
Well, that's my origin story. If I was a superhero that like ported stuff to Linux, I'd have like a penguin on my, trousers or something like that. I don't know, it would be my superhero costume there, but that would be it. Like, I got bit by a spider while working on Civilization Call to Power, and, build up this powerful Linux porting thing. I don't know. That's basically how I got here. But so Loki went out of business, and for lots and lots of awful reasons, and from there we all went off to go get jobs doing something else, and I refused to get a real job, so I just kept on porting games to Linux, and I'm still here. So it's worked out okay for me.
So Loki founded some of the early tools like STL. Do you want to talk a little bit about what some of that was?
Sure. Yeah. So the problem with porting software to any platform is that you end up doing a lot of the same things over and over again. You go, okay, here's another game that's using Direct 3D. Here's another game that's using Direct Draw, whatever we were using back in the 90s. But and rather than take that line for line and port it to exactly what was like the X11 equivalent of that for Linux or whatnot, or whatever the ALSA equivalent for audio would be, we started to realize very quickly that you're doing the same things over and over again, so it made more sense, rather than try and target this exact platform, we should build a nice abstraction layer on that. And one of the first hires at Loki was Sam Lantinga, who had built this thing called SDL, Simple Direct Media Layer, for a different company, and realized it could be a nice cross-platform answer to DirectX. So we started porting games to talk to SDL instead of talking directly to Linux interfaces. And that has worked out really, really well for us over the years, because the Linux interfaces have changed many, many times. We're about to stop talking to X servers, and we're going to talk to Wayland or Mirror or whatever your favorite thing is. Or and Lord knows the sound API in Linux has changed. For a while it seemed like it was changing weekly, so it was nice to just be able to say, this game will keep running. Change your kernel, change your libraries on your system. All you have to do is update your SDL, this one little shared library, if worse comes to worse, and the game will keep working on a system it was never intended to work on before. And that's been incredibly powerful for us. And Loki had done other things such as OpenAL because they needed, the audio equivalent of direct sound 3D. So they built their own cross-platform abstraction layer, and I think that's been helpful. But what I've found, Loki's gone, of course, but what was really powerful, the most powerful lesson I learned from them was that games come and go. You port a game and people love it for a couple of weeks and then they move on. And then they're like, where's the next game? Where's the next game? And that's just the nature of the world. But the tools live forever. If you make it easier to port the next game and build the next game, then your life as a porter and your life as a Linux user has gotten easier. And so Loki was very, very focused not just on porting games, but on building tools to help them port games. And we took all that stuff. It was all open sourced. It was all GPL or public domain or whatever. We took those past Loki's demise and we've built on them for another 15 years after that. And they've become very powerful tool sets. And in many ways, for example, SDL is the de facto, way to make video games on Linux. And if you're not the top tier engine makers, it might actually be your de facto way to make games on any platform at this point. So that has been something that has been incredibly powerful and useful that Loki did, even though Loki itself didn't carry on.
Yeah, and keeping it open source and making sure everybody can contribute. I think that was amazing back then.
It's still amazing today. And, like every open source project, SDL is mostly built by a small core of people. And this was always the surprise, because the Linux kernel is probably and that development model is probably what attracted a lot of people to Linux in the 90s. And you think thousands of people are going to show up and build this incredible Tower of Babel together, and it doesn't work that way. It's, for the most part, it's a handful of contributors that do a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of the maintenance, and occasionally like a one-line patch will come in from a person, but for the most part, it's one person. Or two people, or three people. But being open source like that, we have had, over the course of a long lifetime with SDL, we've had a lot of contributors, although most of them are not hardcore, core maintainers. They popped in and contributed a little bit, and it's been incredibly useful that people could do that. And it's gotten us a lot of places. We've never had an interest in, the Sega Dreamcast, but somebody did a port to it. Or for a long time, we didn't care about, BIOS, or its spiritual successor, is called Haiku, but someone showed up and did a port of it. And, it's all these weird places. Someone shows up and does a Nintendo DS port for the homebrew tools. And it's like, we would never use that, and we don't have an interest in that, but somebody did, and they could show up and do it. And that was kind of incredible.
And that also gives, if those people come and they contribute that and move on, that gives anybody in the future a base to work on if they want to maintain it with new iterations or similar platforms in the future.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we have seen things where people have made changes to SDL. Like, for example, the Wayland fork of SDL it was literally a fork for many, many years, while, Wayland was just beyond experimental in nature. And Wayland's still a very new system, but it's, people tend to think that is where we're going, or Mirror or something like that. But those things all lived outside of SDL's main development branch until one day, suck it all in all at once and say, there you go. Now it's just part of SDL. And that just happened with the Mscript import. But if you want to write a game in C++ and target it at, running it in a web browser, you can do that now. You just compile it with Mscripton, which is Clang. It's literally just a Clang C++ compiler, and it spits out JavaScript. And you can use SDL2 with that now. But for many, many months, that lived outside of SDL's main repository. In fact, Humble Bundle was actually shipping commercial games with it long before it made it into SDL's main repository. And with a lot of collaboration, we got that all merged back in. So the next major version will have that. You can just fire your game off at a web page and it'll just work, and that's pretty incredible. But yeah, it's not just open source gives you that collaboration, but it also lets you decentralize until good ideas become solid and become clearly the right way to go, and then you can pull in what makes sense and reject what doesn't. And you can't really do that in a corporate closed down culture, and I think that's been really incredible for us.
Yeah, definitely.
So you mentioned Humble Bundle, so tell us a little bit about how you got involved with that.
Sure. Humble Bundle started out as three guys, and if you remember the original Humble Indie Bundle, the thing that started their whole, reign of terror over the industry, it was running off Wolfire.com, the guys that did Lugaru, the rabbit ninja simulator. They came to me one day and they said, we have this idea, we want to try to do this. We want to have, I'm trying to think what it was. It was like 5 games or 3 or 4 games. We want to put them in a bundle and say pay what you want, and we'll do this and blah blah blah. And we want to make sure it has Linux and Mac support for all of these games, and if it gets to like I forget what the number it was. It was like if they got to $1 million, they would open source all the games. And I was like, okay, sure, no problem, dude, whatever you say. And I was like, but I like the idea. I think the idea is good. You're never going to make $1 million off of it, but since we're talking about it, there's this game called Aquaria, which I just ported, and I think that would be a good candidate if you wanted to make this bundle a little bigger. And I think you should just, and this is an exact quote, this is what I said, is that you should just put your dick on the table and see if John Blow chops it off, and ask him if he'll let you put Braid in this bundle. And they asked John Blow, and he chopped it right off. He said, no chance, I'm not interested in this. But Aquaria went in there, and some other game got added to, and I can't remember which order these games got in there. But so the first bundle shipped, and $1.1 million later, we're all sitting there with our jaws on the floor, like, oh my god, this made an enormous amount of money. And then the phone starts ringing. So John Blow called back. The Humble Indie Bundle 2 has Braid in it, But so all.
I think a lot of people ate their words.
Well, I like the idea, but there's a lot of ideas that I love that I don't think will make money, but I still think they're worth doing, and that's why I'm basically poor. It's like I've spent my life tilting at windmills, and that just seemed like a good windmill, and it worked out for them, and I think it introduced a business model that people hadn't seen before, regardless of whether you care about Linux or not. You can make a strong argument that changed the way that we buy video games in this generation. But what they had said is that right from the beginning, when this was just 3 dudes sitting in like David Rosen's apartment and running this off David Rosen's website, before it was a company, before it was anything but just some guys thinking they're going to give a little money to charity and maybe open source some games and maybe promote Linux and Mac OS a little bit more than it normally gets promoted. Back when that's all it was.
It's come a long way since then. I think the thing that made it special at the time was that in addition to being new and exciting, it had a lot of different facets that appealed to a lot of different people.
I would argue that so they say that Bungie, I'm sorry, not Bungie, Blizzard hired psychologists to work as full-time staff when they built World of Warcraft and StarCraft and stuff like that, because they wanted to find out the most addictive way to make those games so that people would keep paying month by month to have a subscription. And what are the rewards that trigger the dopamine sensors that blah blah blah. Oh, you can get to level 70, okay, but let's wait a few more months or years and then make it so you can get to level 90, and stuff like that, and even more subtle interactions than that. But Humble Bundle didn't have psychiatrists or psychologists on staff doing that, but somehow they managed to, I think, luck into several psychological things that worked really well. Like they put up the platform pie chart that says this is the amount of money that's being given per platform. Like Linux users are giving this much, and Mac users are giving this much, and blah blah blah. And I think Windows users don't associate themselves as Windows users because it's just it's probably the computer they were always using, and they don't think of Windows as an operating system. They think of it as just the computer, right? But Linux users care very deeply about that, and I think they had something to prove. And also, they weren't in a market flooded with cheap shit. Like, there's tons and tons of crappy Windows games out there, but lots and lots of high quality. Most of the games that are out for Linux are high quality, and there's not many of them, so the money's not spread out so thinly. So I think that Linux users had something to prove, and they had money to give. And I think that helped a great deal. And Humble Bundle is the first to tell you that 25% of their revenue comes from Linux users, even when they're not doing Linux-specific bundles. Linux users still show up and pay more than any other platform. But they also did other psychological things. Like if you tried to give less than $1, it would pop up a little GIF image of a homeless person holding a sign that said, we'll make games
we'll code for food or something,
or something like that. But and the thing is, it's like one that's funny in a kind of not funny way, but also makes you feel a little bad, and you up the amount of money you give. So so they had that kind of. In many ways, they fired on a lot of psychological cylinders that made it successful. Like I think you look at the other people that have come along as imitators of Humble Bundle, and they don't at all. They don't fire on those same cylinders, and they're never as successful, even in their best bundles. So
yeah, they have a competitive element with the pie charts, a feel-good factor with the charity. You never feel like you're giving too much because you can set the price, and now they are multi-million-dollar platform holders because of that.
And yes, that's true. And the nice thing is, and maybe this won't be true forever. every time you see a company get successful, it's like, we're not going to be evil. Sometimes they turn out to be evil. Like, you look at a lot of things Google does, for example. But right now, I think that the people at Humble Bundle have looked at their success and said, what can we do to, be good citizens of the planet? And they've pushed people to open source things. And as they got more successful, that they got a lot more pushback on that, a lot more friction. But in those early days, we open sourced a whole bunch of games, and they said, what can we, we're making a lot of money off of Linux users, which is great. Let's keep trying to port things to Linux. And I've said I've ported about 75 games in 15 years, give or take. I don't know the exact number right now, but it took them 3.5 years to get to 100 Linux games that Humble Bundle had funded ports of, and had organized and worked to get ported to Linux. And that's been an incredible force for good within the Linux community. And if you want to be honest, I think that is what caused Valve to say, let's get Steam on Linux.
Yeah. So, coming to Valve, you gave them a hand as well.
I did.
Tell us about that.
Okay. Valve has this incredible ability to call me whenever I'm in the middle of a life change. They will. I bought a house in Charlotte, and literally maybe a day or two after I signed the papers to finalize and close on the house and say, this is where you live and this is a big financial commitment you're making, they called me up and said, hey, we want to talk to you about maybe coming out here and getting Steam running on Mac OS. And I said, oh my God, could you have called a week ago? But they they brought me out to Bellevue, where Valve is located, and I talked with them about it, and I helped them with that. I wouldn't say I did the most of the work on the Mac Steam version. Other people did that, of course, and I contributed where I could. But they launched the Mac version of Steam, and that was a big deal because the rumor is that Valve went to Apple, and Apple said, we want Steam on Linux. I think that would be good for our platform. And Valve said, give us $1 million or something like that. And Apple said no, and that was the end of that. And there's drama, and it was like watching an episode of One Tree Hill or something like that. But when Valve decided to do this on their own, they said, we don't expect this to make more money than Windows, and I don't think it ever has. Of course, I mean the Valve, the Mac market is much smaller than the Windows market. So, but they set a modest guideline. Said, if we can get to making X% of money, X% of our sales come from Mac users, we'll call this a success. And I don't know the number, but it was very low. But they hit that number. And once they hit that number, there was a lot of interest at Valve. It's listening to people that are saying, well, we always want to do this Linux version, but there's never been the will to do it here. But, you trusted us on the Mac version, and look, it worked out. It's profitable. It's making money. And, it's not going to beat the Windows version because there's just not enough warm bodies out there. But it's been worth the time it took to do it, and the support and the effort. So I had a child. I have a daughter. Her name's Olive. She's incredible. And almost right after she was born, Valve called me and said, hey, you want to come talk to us about a Linux version of this? And I asked, couldn't you have called 9 months earlier? But so they so we started talking about that, and they had me in the office working, and they basically sat me down and they said, this is Left 4 Dead 2. Get zombies on the screen. Okay, no problem. I mean, I think that was the explicit command was, we want to see zombies running on Linux, walking around the screen. So we got it that far, and it was running not very well, but it was running. And then from there, it was enough for Valve to say, okay, let's hire some Linux engineers and get them in-house and, get things ported and get this thing optimized. And I'm sure lots of your listeners have read that blog post where they're like, we have the OpenGL renderer running on Linux, and it's faster than Direct3D under Windows. And it was a big deal. And and then they announced SteamOS or Steam for Linux, and then SteamOS, and and a lot of and they did Steam Dev Days 2 years ago, and a lot of companies started saying there might be some money in this. And people who never cared about the philosophy of Linux, or cared about open source, or just cared about alternate platforms, were suddenly like, maybe we should be looking at this. And you can see the explosion of games that have happened here, where Alienware last year said there'd be 700 games by the end of the year, and it turned out to be like 850. I don't know if anyone got a final count of that or not, but games are just flooding into Linux now. For the most part, we're still in that comfort zone where we're not getting a lot of bad games. We're not getting a lot of good games. It's not like today's shovelware crapola or today's casual match 3 game, although I'm sure there's some of those. It's not like everyday submissions to the iOS App Store yet, where it's 300 150 crappy clone games of Flappy Bird, So I feel like right now this is actually the beginning of a very interesting time in Linux gaming, where content is starting to show up, developers are starting to show up, gamers are starting to show up. I mean, all the pieces are here now. It's just a question of whether we can get it to get bigger and bigger from here.
Definitely on the cusp of exciting times. We're in the midst of exciting times.
Somewhere in the vicinity of exciting times.
Yeah, GDC should tell us a lot more about it. Are you going to be there?
I will not be at GDC. I have like I mentioned, I have a daughter, and the thing about having a 3-year-old is that basically you spend your entire life sick and tired. So I've had a cold for about 7 or 8 months now, so I'm gonna stay away from public spaces for a while. Just try to sleep when I can.
And do you have any feelings on what impact GL Next might have on Linux gaming?
I think it's too soon to say. I think. I think what we probably want from GL Next is more or less just to make sure that we stay in parity with, what we're moving towards with the next DirectX and the next, with Mantle and Apple's Metal and stuff. We're moving to a kind of a lower level, closer to the Metal sort of graphics API that doesn't hold your hand and manage a lot of state for you. And OpenGL and Direct3D and all these have been moving away from being really user-friendly for newbies and becoming flexible and powerful and fast for hardcore developers. And I think that's okay. I think that probably what we're going to want to do is start building things on top of them. Simple little rendering libraries where it's like, look, if all you want to do is get some polygons on the screen and maybe texture map them and not really do anything fancy, here's something built on top of GL Next or Direct3D 12 or whatnot like that. And then for the people that need to build like AAA level engines that can do things powerfully and fast as hell and stuff like that, they'll write to these lower level APIs. What will it do for Linux? I'm going to say I don't think it'll make a difference. I think people either use OpenGL or they don't. And I think that NVIDIA will show up with a nice implementation, and Mesa will work really hard to build an implementation at all, and and we'll catch up over time. And it's not like, I don't mean to. That sounded really negative towards Mesa. Those guys work like hell to get things done, but it's always been a big project. So
they're chasing moving targets as well.
Well, absolutely, it's absolutely true. But I think if we're lucky, one of the nice things with GL Next is it'll be a much simpler API. And the problem is that once you get into OpenGL 3 and OpenGL 4, you have so much backwards compatibility and so much weight from legacy decisions that are really bad, but you have to support because games 5 years ago used them and they're not going to be updated and stuff like that. And if you look at, say, what macOS did, they support OpenGL 3 and OpenGL 4 now in their latest versions of the OS, but only the core profile, which is to say that if you have a backwards compatible game, too bad, update your game if you want to use the newer OpenGL. And I think that's the right decision. I think that things like that will help Mesa too, because it's like, look, man, there's less to implement, less weird side effects you have to worry about and manage between these two conflicting extensions and these two weird things. And I think that will help them a lot moving forward. And I don't know what GL Next will look like exactly yet, but my suspicion is it's going to be a simpler API just by the nature of being lower level and expecting the application to do more of the work and more of the management. I think that's going to help Mesa pick up steam. It'll pick up speed. Let's not use steam. That's a totally different argument there. Okay. But basically, yeah, I think that's where we're going with it. I think it's going to be a good thing, but if you're asking if that's going to make everyone jump over to OpenGL, I would say no. I think everyone's going to keep doing what they do, the way they're doing it now, and that's okay. I think that'll be okay.
Do you think that the offer of AMD donating like parts or almost all of Metal to the GL Next initiative has come to fruition in any way, or do you expect a new Kronos-designed API here?
I don't know the answer to that, but I would say just based on observation of everyone over the years, there's no earthly way they're going to be like, let's just change the name on Mantle. For the most part, nobody really knows what Mantle looks like right now because AMD, to my knowledge, still hasn't actually shipped a version you can use unless you are working on Battlefield 4 or a couple of other games. So I don't think anyone in Kronos is going to accept that wholesale, and certainly they're almost certainly going to want to change things anyway, and they're going to want to make it their own thing. And at a minimum, there's the psychological effect of the bike shed, and that's not going to be overcome. So I'm sure it's not going to look like Mantle, even if it kind of feels a little like Mantle. But all these things, Mantle and Metal and all these things, basically they all have the same basic principle, even though the APIs are totally different. Make it simple. Here's how you get shaders to the hardware. Here's how you get data to the GPU, and more or less you can do it from any thread. And there's a lot less state control at the API level. It's mostly in the application now. So I'm tap dancing around your question here because I don't know the answer to this at all. But
that was exactly what I wanted. I wanted you to have educated guesses on this because.
Yeah. I would say it's unlikely it's going to... I don't know what Mantle looks like because very few people do at this point, but I would say it's going to look nothing like Mantle by the time we're done. In fact, I would guess probably the main effect of this is going to kill Mantle, because who's going to want to support that? Like, if your hardware can do DirectX 12, which is what most people on Windows want to write to, and it could do GL Next, which presumably most of our hardware will be able to write to, who's going to target Mantle as a separate thing? I mean, when the benefit of it was less CPU overhead when drawing, but if they're all offering that, it will probably be the death of Mantle. But again, that might be okay too.
This kind of all reminds me of the Glide versus OpenGL days.
Well, yeah, everything old is new again, right? I mean, you're absolutely right about that.
I feel like your middleware and engine vendors are probably going to help shape the uptake and impact of this stuff to a degree.
I think that's true. I want to mention the Glide thing one more time though, just before we forget about this. Is that Glide was a stopgap? That's what we had to use because there really was no OpenGL that you could use when Glide first came out, and even after OpenGL started to trickle down to desktop machines in the late 90s, it was like a Quake 1. Everyone had played GL Quake, like, wow, man, 3D accelerated Quake 1, but that was such a subset. They called it a mini GL. That was such a subset of OpenGL. Nobody wanted to implement that whole thing. It's kind of a beast of an API, and you've watched Mesa try to implement this thing over decades now, and it's like, I mean, Glide had to be an answer. It was a totally reasonable technical decision to make, but to introduce that API. But the better example of what you're probably talking about is what happened between OpenGL and Direct3D, where that was a company coming in and bullying to basically say, and Direct3D has turned out to be a pretty good API, again, over several decades, but it wasn't when it was first introduced. But that was basically Microsoft doing what Microsoft always does, and what this was the video game equivalent of what Internet Explorer did to Netscape. They came in and just flexed their muscles and kind of ruined something beautiful. Okay, fine, that's unfortunate, but I would say that Mantle and Metal are the opposite. It's true they are competing APIs, but I don't think it's people trying to steal market share. I think for the most part, this is people saying enough. There are too many problems with OpenGL, and it's not solvable unless we throw it out and start over. And it's I mean, OpenGL's fine; it can do whatever you need it to do. But it's hard to get. You have like I said, you have all this legacy compatibility bulk, and you have a design committee that slows these things down. It's just the nature of the thing. But Apple probably couldn't have gotten the changes they wanted into OpenGL to do what they wanted, so they made their own thing. And that's kind of what Mantle did too. I mean, AMD certainly could have gone to the GL. ARB and said, we to Kronos and said, we would like to make all these radical changes, but I think that the answer would have been no. So, by saying this is a whole new API and it solves all these problems we couldn't get done in OpenGL, I think that lit a fire. I think that kicked some people in the ass, and now we're talking about GL Next and DirectX 12 and stuff like that. And I think it's a different motivation. I don't think it was done from malice, although I'm sure they would all love to have more market share. But I think it was a brute force technical decision to get everyone moving. And it might be that Mantle was always meant to be a sacrificial cow. It's possible they knew this would never work, but it would get everyone moving, and it certainly has, right? That between that and Metal.
Of course, AMD has a lot of stuff involved with the consoles now. I imagine they might try to push with that, where they have more of a hold on that kind of market.
Yeah, it's true. And my understanding is NVIDIA had an OpenGL implementation for the Xbox when the original Xbox had NVIDIA chips in it. But generally speaking, I don't know that most people are going to be like. I think most people are probably going to keep using Direct3D on the consoles or whatever the PlayStation 4 uses. I think that's just the nature of it. I don't think that any of these are going to win market share. I think that's an uphill battle. That what's the return on investment for them to build a new API to try and beat the other APIs on a closed down console? I don't know. I don't know that there is a win on that. So, or if it's a win worth taking. What would the cost be to try and beat out Direct3D on the desktop, for example? I don't know. It's a good question, but
so moving on from that, in addition to everything else, you also host a website called iculus.org.
Yes, I do.
Which my understanding was that originally the plan was to sort of create this kind of, I guess, incubation site for open source projects.
Yeah, so I bought the domain a little bit before I left Loki, just so I could have like a vanity website, and it's like my login name at Loki was Iculus. There's a long story, I won't get into it, but I bought Iculus.org. It's like, oh, this is fun, you know. I put like, you know, pictures of my friends getting drunk or something. This is pre-Facebook, you understand. But after I left Loki, I said, you know, I could do something with this domain, and I wanted to have my own email. I didn't really want to go to, especially in the 90s, email providers were really flaky. Like, you could just get overloaded with spam and not have any recourse at all, or you could just simply, your email provider would just go away, because that's just how it worked, you know. And so I was like, well, I have this. So I went to a friend who he had a cyber cafe back when that was a radical idea. And I said, you have like a T1 line or something coming into this building. I don't suppose I could pay you some money. I could hook a computer up to that T1 line so I could have, you know, my own email, and, you know, I do some open source development. I like to have my own CVS server and blah, blah, blah. And he goes, oh, so you want to have a co-located server? I didn't know there was a word for it. And I was like, yeah, sure. So I set that up, and I figured once I had that server space, it was literally just a crappy old like desktop, like a Pentium 1 or something that I had in the closet at my parents' house. I brought it over to the store. I figured, you know, once I was there, if anyone else wanted an email address, or, you know, wanted some space to host a CVS project in CVS or something, feel free. And then after a couple people came to me and asked me to host, I was like, why don't I just offer this to anyone on the internet that wants to do it? And that was a fairly radical idea at the time. The only thing that was doing something like that was SourceForge and maybe Beryllios, or whatever, however you pronounce that. And they were kind of more corporate and kind of more faceless and stuff. I wanted to be very personal. Like, if you had a problem, you talked to Ryan about it. You didn't talk to tech support about it. And we used to joke that Iculus.org was SourceForge with soul. And it worked. it worked out. And the thing is, it's become obsolete at this point. I used to call it an open source incubator, and we had probably 100 to 150 developers working on it at some point, and some are still there. But I feel like it's been obsolete at this point by my lack of free time, but also GitHub and, you know, Trello, and, you know, all sorts of really good projects that are hosted by other people that help maintain, you know, help support open source projects. So the server's going to stay up, obviously, and the people who are still working on it are welcome there, but I don't really give out many accounts anymore at this point. Occasionally I get a request from someone, and unless it's a really compelling reason, it's like, look, even the people that are well behaved on the server and don't need anything take up too much of my time. So I try not to, like, you know, I already have too many somethings in the fire. I don't know. So it's just, we don't do much hosting anymore, new hosting at this point. But for a good decade or so, before things like GitHub and such started showing up, it was really like, a lot of people were like, I need to get an account on this, because this is, people take it seriously. And people have told me before that if someone wrote to them with an iculus.org email address, they would take them much more seriously, you know, and as opposed to, I guess, I don't know, Hotmail or something. But you can say that about a lot of addresses. I don't know. Anyway, so that's what I did for many years, and that's where I host my project still, and I'm pretty happy with it. The cloud. The idea of the cloud is a terrible thought. Is a terribly scary thing to me. So I can't imagine not hosting all my own stuff. So that's kind of why it's there.
Early on with some of that, I remember you saying like you felt there were hardly anybody else porting games, and you wanted to try and promote the people that were interested in doing that. Was that part of the reason for iculus.org, or was that just kind of a general, you know, pull everybody together type of site?
My goal wasn't specifically games. Obviously, I was focused on games, but and several of my friends who, because they were, you know, we all ran the same circles, they were also interested in that. So like we had, you know, hosted the open source port of Duke Nukem 3D for a while. We were the first ones to have it running on Linux, and other people have shown up since and done better ports. But, you know, we just like to plant our flag first sometimes, you know. But and, you know, other games like that, and Dark Places is hosted on our server and stuff like that. But that was never really my specific intention. And there are lots of non-game projects on there. Like, there's some guy that's hooked up some GPS thing to his car, and it reports back data as you drive around. He can build all these cool like 3D maps from it about where he's been, and information about his car at any given time and stuff, and that's hosted on there. And it has nothing to do with video games. Although I bet that would be a great alternate reality game now I'm thinking about it. But like lots and lots of stuff. And my focus has been on games. Usually, I'm either working on a game or on a tool that helps me build a game or port a game, and so a lot of that stuff gets hosted there. But that was never the specific intention, and certainly things that weren't games showed up on there too, and I thought that was great.
Nice.
So you mentioned GitHub and Trello earlier, and you talked about how you don't you find the cloud a little bit disconcerting. What do you think of the sort of
And yet unavoidable, yes.
yeah. Do you think that there are what do you think of the potential risks there for free software projects that are relying on proprietary services like GitHub and Trello?
Well, I think GitHub is less of a problem. I get all the time questions from people being like, "Why didn't you put this project on GitHub?" And they don't mean why aren't you using Git? They mean why aren't you using GitHub? And I think Git is an awful piece of software. I think it's designed for people that are much smarter than me. And every time I use Git, I end up destroying my local clone of the repository just by accident. Like I just look at it wrong and it falls apart. But on top of that really complex software, GitHub has built something that's a really nice user interface, and people really like that. And the whole pull request thing is kind of amazing, to be fair. But the nice thing about Git is that if GitHub pulls the plug on everything and goes out of business and you can't ever use it anymore, you haven't lost your data, because that's the nature of Git. It's all sitting, everyone's got a copy of it, which is great. So that's good. But so if something like Trello goes down, you're done. And I use Trello, and I love Trello, and I hate that I love Trello, because if that thing goes away, my whole organization system goes with it, and that's terrifying to me. There's no recourse. I mean, I think you might be able to export your data in JSON format, which is great, but what the hell are you going to do with it once you have it? You don't have the tools anymore, and that's the nature of the cloud. And you're finding this is true everywhere. I assume Android works this way, but iOS has started doing auto updates in the latest versions of your apps as you use your iPhone. Like one day you'll go to bed and you'll check Twitter, and in the morning you'll check Twitter again, and the app looks totally different, and that is so disorienting to me. And I know you can turn that off. Someone's about to say that in the chat room, I'm sure, but that's kind of, as the cloud becomes more popular, there are benefits. There's merits and flaws to it, but of the merits, the flaws are kind of devastating. They can take it away from you. They can change it at any time. You don't really own your data. You definitely don't own the code. You don't have any control over your own life the more you use cloud services, and they're becoming more and more inevitable as time goes on, and just being introduced into our lives whether you like it or not. And I remember seeing a tweet about if you all remember, iCloud got hacked, and all those celebrities had nude photos of them leaked, and everyone's like, well, why would you take nude photos of yourself and store them on the internet? We've built a system where it does that by default, and that's awful, and it's like, there was a really real cost to that particular thing, but, your source code could go away just as easily, and if not your source code, because it's Git, if GitHub goes away, your community and the way that you manage contributions, poof, up in smoke. Because let me tell you, all those people are like, why didn't you use GitHub? They are never ever going to email you a patch. They just don't know how to do it right. I don't know how to do it right. I look at the patches coming on the kernel mailing list. I'm like, how the fuck did you get that to work? I don't know the command that makes the patches generate that way into emails. So and I think that everyone else would have that problem too. And I'm sure GitHub's fine. I'm sure they've got tons of funding and, a sustainable business model, but are you sure about it? I mean, you're gambling on it every day you use it, and that's true of every cloud service. And the less of them you can use, and the more of your own things you can use, and the more you can host your own servers and run your own daemons. You trade off the time you have to manage these things. And my God, if I have to read one more page of documentation about how to tweak some setting on Apache, I'm going to kill myself. But that's the trade-off you make. It's like, I know that if anything goes wrong with my server, I don't have to wait for tech support to get back to me. I just go fix it. Anyway, I could rant about this for hours, and I'm not saying anything anyone here doesn't know. I'm just preaching to the choir. But this is the way we're going, and it's possible you can't stop this future from happening at this point, but you can take steps to protect yourself, and I think that's worth everyone knowing how to do.
Yeah, I think awareness is sort of the key thing there.
I agree.
It's getting trickier though. Like even now, I think I'd just love to just go set up my own mail server and handle things. And I think, well, how many of the major mail servers are even going to accept mail from me without going through a bunch of hoops? And I don't know. It's kind of scary.
Not a single one of them. It's really, really frustrating. It's you can set up a dedicated server, but like lots of people are like, I'll just run a mail server on my cable modem. Oh, your mail's not going anywhere, friend. And the thing is, right now you cannot send mail to Verizon's email servers from iculus.org because they put me on a blacklist for reasons I can't understand, and they won't call me back. And I filled out their form, and they're just like, nope, you can't. We're not taking you off the blacklist, and if you need to dispute this, just fill out this form. And there's no form. It's like this really like Kafka-esque kind of emails trash. I mean, we need to throw the whole system in the garbage and come up with something better. It's just time. I mean, I don't think it's fixable anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, email sounds like the thing they did to communicate from computer to computer back when the whole network concept was still in a local area. And then they extended it to the internet and said, let's see how that turns out. And it didn't turn out very well.
Well, in their defense, no one knows they're going to be successful. And it's just like, well, we didn't think we were going to be stuck with this bullshit system for the rest of our lives. So, and there is a precedent. Nobody uses Usenet anymore. And the reason they stopped using Usenet is because it became this wasteland of spam and, garbage, basically. So we just kind of stopped using it. I know it still exists, but nobody uses it anymore. And it's just, we could do that with email. We could all move to something like Jabber, for example, or we could all move to, some kind of other system. I don't know. It could look like a number of things. Heaven forbid we all just start tweeting at each other, but something like that.
Yeah, I was gonna say we all use Twitter instead.
And the thing is, when this kind of change happens, nobody remembers consciously stopping using Usenet. It just happened one day. One day you realize that you haven't been on there in a long time, and neither have any of your friends. And I think that was probably true when everyone moved from like MySpace to Facebook or to Twitter or whatever. And when we leave Twitter and Facebook, God, I hope we do that someday. We'll move to something else and not even realize that we just all migrated at some point. Just email is, it's got a lot of momentum, and there's always going to be that person with the 90-year-old aunt that can't get her to stop using it because she's never going to use Twitter, and whatever. Fine, it's a mess, and these things fix themselves over time. But we could be another decade away from that. I don't know. I really don't know.
We still have people using fax machines.
It's always just migration. My nephew, for example, he has his first smartphone and he's constantly on WhatsApp with his friends, and Facebook isn't even in the equation anywhere at all. He doesn't care for it.
Except that they own WhatsApp, but yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean the service Facebook. And Facebook are smart, they know this, so they keep these services as separate as they can. They always confirm hey, we're not merging this with Facebook Messenger, because they know if they do that, they aren't cool anymore, and if they aren't cool anymore, they will lose these kids.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
So we might move on and chat about some of the recent games you worked on. What was the most recent thing that you ported?
I think the most recent thing that has shipped, I have like 12 projects up in the air. You know how it goes, but the most recent thing I shipped is probably Another World, or Out of This World, depending on which part of the planet you lived on when this first shipped, which I love.
Isn't that a great game?
Yeah, I don't know. Do you think so? I don't know. I think somebody's written a long article about this. It's an incredible game, and I wanted to do it because one, it was an incredible game, but also it was the first game I ever owned. I bought with my own money when I was a kid for MS-DOS many years ago, and just when I first played it, it just blew my mind. It was like there are certain epochs in video gaming where you see a game do something, and you literally think to yourself, I didn't know you could do this. And I think a lot of people felt that way when they first saw Doom or maybe Wolf 3D, where you're like, wow, this 3D world. I didn't know you could do this in a video game. I didn't know this was technically possible. And I felt that way about Another World when I first saw it. It's incredibly cinematic. It's rendering with polygons, so it's very fluid, in the same way, it feels a lot like Prince of Persia did, in that sort of fluidity. And it doesn't say a word at all in the entire game, but it tells this incredible story as you go along, in this epic struggle for survival, just scratching it out across the surface of this foreign planet. It tells you so much without saying a word, and I really love that about it, not just from a technical level, but also from an artistic level. So I spent many months, probably 2 years, trying to get in touch with the people who own the copyright on the new version of that, and I know you helped me with this too. We spent a lot of detective work trying to get in touch with them, and then never discount good fortune. One of the people that worked on that game wrote to me with a bug in Mojo Shader, which is an open source project I do. And I fixed his bug, and like immediately I was like, this is high priority right now. And once I fixed that, I'm like, okay, while I have your attention, I really need to get a Linux port of this game. He's like, oh yeah, I'll talk to the right person about it. And then it moved forward immediately. And it's amazing how things like that can work. You know, you do an enormous amount of legwork, and it just turns out to be good fortune in the long run. And they gave me the source code, and we ported it, and it was great, and it's still great. And I'm, you know, occasionally I just like to play through it. Once you know how to beat the game, it's very, very short. But you know, I just love the experience of it, and that was so important to me to do that.
It blew my mind as well. Just that whole thing of it, the kind of story that it manages to tell without saying a word it's so inspiring to me. I had the same kind of experience. You know, it's the first game that I've ever played that I looked at and went, wow, you know, games can be this kind of creative expression thing. They can be art, you know.
Absolutely. I'd like to point out there's someone in the chat room saying there is in fact a word spoken in the game, but it's not spoken in any human language. The one alien says "my Karuba" at one point. So, in fact, if you look at like fan forums for this game, they refer to that alien as Mike Karuba, like they think that's his name.
I actually did a short interview with Eric in preparation for the follow-up article that I'm working on at the moment, and he says that in his mind when he wrote it, it was Matsuba.
Oh, that's good to know.
So nice piece of trivia I was able to expose there.
I like that.
Had a lot of sad Mike Karuba fans. Apparently in Japanese it translates to pine needle, but that wasn't something he was aware of at the time, I don't think. So there you go. Exciting stuff. Like you say, you know, we kind of hunted around. It took a long time to come into contact with the right people, but in the last couple of months, I've had another 5 or 6 people who had direct lines of contact to Eric talk to me and say, oh, if you had have asked me, or if I had have known that you were looking for him, you know, I would have been able to help out. So
yeah, thanks a lot, pal.
It's funny how these missed connections, yeah.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, what really started this whole thing between you and me was that I tweeted. I was like, "Does anyone know how to get in touch with this guy?" Because you know, there's an email address on his kind of semi-official Another World website, and the damn mailbox is full. It bounces your email, and it's like, "Come on, man, check your mail, check your mail."
And I'd corresponded with him back in it might have been 2005, I think it was. And you know, had a little bit of back and forth there, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can reach him. That's cool. And then yeah, encountered the same problem.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, he actually wrote to me from that email address to thank me for doing the work, and I was like, I like, you know, twittered around like a little girl after that. I was like, yay! You know, like it's really neat when you meet like a childhood hero of yours and they're not a dick. That's so nice, you know, because I've met a lot of people in this industry and been like, oh man, you're not a very nice guy in person, you know. So it was really nice to find out that he was, you know, just really kind to work with. So I like that.
Yeah, he does seem like a nice and genuine person, and it is kind of touching to see that. But we have in text chat here, we have Flibbit, who is the person who brought to my attention that you were trying to reach Eric. So I think he probably deserves a little bit of mention for helping bring that together as well.
I would just like to say about Flibbit that he sent me a 5,000 line patch to Mojo Shader, and my god, I can't get through it all. It's like reading War and Peace.
This man really knows how to get shit done.
He's a machine. It's really impressive. I wish I had as much stamina as he does. It's actually really, really impressive, the patch he sent me. It's like the thing is, Mojo Shader was written, for those that don't know, Mojo Shader is the thing that basically you give it bytecode for direct 3D shaders, and it spits out OpenGL shaders. And you know, we've used it on a lot of projects, and it's saved my life. I had to write it because I had no other way forward. And it's the same thing we did with SDL at Loki and OpenAL. It's like we had no way forward, so we had to build one. But Ethan is using Flibbit. Is using it on his project, FNA, and he has a list of 1 million bugs in it. And he's like, the dude just rolled up his sleeves and just said, I have this many bugs and I'm knocking them all out. And my God, he did. Like, he built out whole subsystems that were just kind of there, like, this is good enough for my needs right now, but it's not really a perfect system. And there were places where he needed a perfect system. So he sat down and over a course of several weeks, build it and sent me this patch. And I promise I'm going to sort through it and get it into revision control, Ethan. I'm sorry. I'm getting to it.
And also recently you worked on a couple games for Coffee Stain.
Yes, I did.
So that's Sanctum 2 and Goat Simulator. How well have they been received? They're very different titles.
Yes, and I think they would tell you the same thing. I think they've been well received. Sanctum sat in like a beta state for way too long, and I think that people kind of decided that we were done with it. But what we're actually doing is desperately trying to finish Goat Simulator. And then we warned you, the game that literally popped up a message box at the beginning saying, "Hey, this is beta software. Bugs are going to happen. We're going to get to it. We promise." And we did. But for a long time in Sanctum, you would fall through the floor at random places. There's a funny story behind that. I'll tell you in a moment. But we're working on that. We're working on Goat Simulator at the same time, because Sanctum had dragged on for a long time. We're trying to get this game running, and they're like, "Look, can you stop working on this, drop everything, and try to get Goat Simulator done by April 1st, April Fool's Day, for the launch of it?" And it's like, okay, what could possibly go wrong? So we focused on that, and did the best we could. But yeah, both those games were kind of being ported in parallel, and there were just I don't think it's anything they did. The fun thing about Unreal Engine 3 is that every game is different. You never get the same bugs in any two Unreal Engine 3 games, and they're all wildly entertaining. It's like none of them are ever simple fixes. Because Unreal Engine 3 was kind of a rolling release, and this is true of everything. But for a long time, Unreal Engine 2, the thing that Unreal Tournament 2004 was built off of, that was a fairly relatively stable code base, because they finished that game, and they did some fixes, and then they moved on to Unreal Engine 3. But there was many, many years where people were still licensing Unreal Engine 2, but it didn't change much. So it was pretty much a known quantity. But Unreal Engine 3 was very, very popular, and it was rolling releases. Like, you could get the code drop for this as a licensee and build your game, and then the next licensee comes along a month later and gets an entirely different code drop because there's been a month of fixes and improvements and changes. So you would get two games that were built that were started a couple of months apart from each other, and neither of them were straightforward ports. You couldn't take your work you did on one and do it on the other for the most part, or for in crucial ways. And so, we said, okay, here's Sanctum, and we got that done, and some of that work applied to Goat Simulator, but then there was all sorts of other new unique things in Goat Simulator, and it became, this has been the ongoing problem with Unreal Engine 3. One of the benefits of Unreal Engine 4 is that they're building Linux support right into it, so that presumably that will, going forward, continue to work on Linux out of the box. So we will have less of these kind of like, here's a mountain we didn't think we were going to have to climb today moments that we're, going forward. I hope that's how it's going to work out.
We live in a strange world where Unreal Engine 4 is on Linux before, it's available, and they have source available to anybody at any level kind of thing, and Unity is the expensive engine on the block.
Confidentially, I ran into Mark Rain, who is one of the VPs at Epic, and he showed me a picture, literally a selfie on his cell phone that he had taken on the day that they announced Unreal Engine 4 was going to this new business model. And it was a selfie of him and the guy that runs Unity and the guy who runs Crytek. And Mark Rain is smiling like it's his birthday, and the other two have this kind of I really wish I wasn't here right now look on their face. And his favorite picture at the time, it was just kind of like, let me show you this picture of these two, because he knew that day that he had destroyed the business model of every game engine moving forward. And Unity is probably going to have to make changes to the way they do business, and Crytek, I don't even know what to tell you about Crytek. They're having some issues apparently. So, but this could be revolutionary. This could be a big difference in how we make AAA games at this point. And for those in the channel that don't know, you can get Unreal Engine 4 for $19. Literally, you can pay them $19 and be done with it. They charge you monthly to give you access to their GitHub repository, but you can stop paying them anytime. So you can pay them $19 and be like, that's a complete copy of Unreal Engine 4, and you can keep using it even if you stop paying.
But you still have to pay 5% royalties on everything you do commercially, just to be precise.
That's true, but I think frankly that's probably less than you were paying with Unreal Engine 3 anyway. But yeah, and that's true. You pay them royalties, but all things being equal, it's actually a pretty small percentage for what you're getting there. But I would argue that most people don't ship commercial games. I think that most people are probably like, I want to pay $19 and just see what this is like, or I'm a student and I just want to, pay what I would pay at Starbucks over the course of a month, and for a couple of cups of coffee, and just explore this or build something small and interesting that I never planned to sell. But even still, it's like, even if you're just if you're Ubisoft or you're Activision and you're building an Unreal game, it's like it's a game changer. It's absolutely a game changer. And they're getting pull requests on this GitHub repository of theirs too. So they're not only are people paying them a small amount to see it, they're getting free labor out of them too. So it's really an amazing change in the way that things are done. This is something that this was not something that was done before recently.
Yeah, I think it's going to be time before we see what kind of impact this is going to have, but I think it's going to have just really change the landscape.
Oh, and also, if you keep in mind what they were doing before, like their option before, if you weren't basically like a world-class, like multi-million-dollar developer like Ubisoft or something like that, they had something they called the UDK, the Unreal Development Kit. And you could write games, you got access to the editor, and you got access to Unreal Script, which is the scripting language that the old version of the engine used to use. And you didn't get C++ access. You didn't get engine source code at all. And that's an enormous pain in the ass unless you're building, unless you're building basically a first-person shooter. It's like you probably ran into a lot of limitations there. And this is that's gone. They don't do the UDK anymore. Now you just get here's access to our GitHub repository, and that's a sea change. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I think it's already turning. There's an active community of people in their Linux IRC channel contributing patches and making it work better on Linux all the time. So I think it's a good thing. I think it's an incredibly good thing. And if it forces everyone else to charge less for the engine and give out the source code, that's a huge, huge win for everyone that cares about video games at all.
Definitely. And it has been inspiring to see the amount of community contributions which have found their way in.
Absolutely. And what I like about this most is that I feel like this is righting a wrong. Like there's this long-standing promise that we made when I was working very closely with Epic that we were going to get the editor out there. Like we switched the whole thing from Unreal Engine 2, where it used, I think it used MFC or something atrocious like that for the editor, Microsoft Foundation class GUI toolkit. It was switched from that to WX widgets with the explicit intention of getting this thing running on Mac and Linux in addition to Windows. If you wanted to run the editor and build a game on Linux, you could do it. But we never pulled the trigger on it. Like Unreal Engine 3 still uses WX widgets for the editor, but we never got ported. There was too much other stuff going on. It just never happened. And I feel like we're finally righting that wrong with Unreal Engine 4, or they are. I shouldn't say we. And that the editor already runs on Linux. You can already start building your game without owning a Windows machine at all, which is exciting. And it's like I like when we can right wrongs like that over time and fix promises that were broken before.
So tell us, how did that even feel after working on Unreal Engine 3 for so long and it never actually coming to Linux? And then years later you get, in the wake of all the Humble Bundle porting, you get Unreal Engine 3 games again, and I'm working on that again, and this time it's actually meant to ship?
Yeah, it's complicated. Oh, were you waiting for more of an answer than that? Okay.
I didn't even want to have the explanation on that, just on the feeling of seeing that again after so many years.
I have a lot of anxiety about Unreal Engine 3, and I still do to this day. But Dungeon Defenders is the game that we got, and it was with Humble Bundle, and there's been many since then. But Dungeon Defenders was the first one, and it was just some random snapshot, way ahead of what Unreal Tournament 3 was using. And we had Unreal Tournament 3 running. The frame rate wasn't very good, but we had, built something running that ran, and then we came back to it many years later with Dungeon Defenders, and there was a new OpenGL renderer because iOS had become very important. They had shipped Infinity Blade, so they had some GL code and some Unix concessions they had made in the source code, and it was in some ways it was easier. Some pieces of Unreal Tournament 3 made it into Dungeon Defenders, like of my Linux port of it, and some things were there that were built for the Mac and iOS versions that helped me a great deal. But it was very stressful for me. It was amazing the psychological toll that working on that took. Where like before we had the game running, and I remember it was right before Christmas of whatever year that was that we finally got Dungeon Defenders running, and before we got a screen, like a window to come up at all, it was like, this is never going to work. This is never going to work, and there was all this anxiety and all this pressure to ship because the bundle was coming up, and I finally got the thing to bring up a window at all, and the damn thing was running like beautifully the first time. Like it was like rendering correctly when the first time we got a window up there at all. And I took a screenshot of it with I took a picture of it with my cell phone and sent a text of it to my wife. And I remember she wrote back, she's like, "Christmas is uncanceled." It's just it was really like, after that, it's like, okay, we can all stop hyperventilating. We can make this work. This is actually doable. And there are other problems with Dungeons and Defenders, not the least is that the physics library that it uses didn't exist on Linux, and we didn't have source code to it at the time, which was not great for Dungeons and Defenders, but it was not super crucial. Someone's about to be like, yes, it is. Those gems don't float towards you, but fuck you, asshole. But anyway, but it was, it's amazing how much stress that caused me, just in terms of like getting out of bed in the morning and be like, I don't want to walk towards my computer because Unreal Engine 3 is waiting for me. And I still feel some of that residualness with Unreal Engine 4, where it's like I walk to it, it's like it's almost a totally different code base. There's no Unreal script in it anymore. The renderer is totally different. A lot of the internals are just, they look and feel different. But it's amazing the amount of psychological toll that can take on you. Just fear of failures, and like that little like demon of failure is floating right on your shoulder with his claws in your neck, going, don't fuck this up. You're probably gonna fuck it up though. Oh great. So you'd be surprised. Failure is a good way to learn things, and it also kind of never leaves you once you start failing at things. So keep it in mind. Don't ever try anything. That's what I would suggest. Just try to live a comfortable life where you don't ever succeed at anything, or try in the first place.
On the UE3 note, it kind of, from an outside observer's perspective, it looked like a lot of the frustration of Linux users was, it seemed like the Iculus.org mailing list and you personally bore the brunt of a lot of that frustration. Do you think that that's the case?
The frustration with what? Unreal Tournament 3?
Yeah.
I would say that, I mean, it got to the point where I actually unsubscribed from the UT3 mailing list long before it stopped being, well trafficked, because it's like I don't have anything to tell you, and all you're gonna do is be mad at me. And I understand. I mean, you should be mad at me. You should be mad at a lot of people. I'm actually more sad that people at Epic probably got a lot of grief that really didn't deserve it, because they had nothing to do with the project except they told me to go do it. And Steve Polge, who's one of the leads over at Epic, I'm sure he got an enormous amount of grief, and he's like, who the fuck are these people emailing me? I don't even know what's going on. So and I sympathize with that. I mean, like I said, they should be angry. It didn't work out, and it would be interesting if we had that kind of spectacular failure in this post Peter Molyneux Kickstarter era that we're in now, where we kind of expect to invest in games on Kickstarter and have them never show up or be 2 years late or something like that. Maybe people would be a little more understanding, maybe not. I don't know. I can't say. I think everyone's anger was probably totally justified, but it just turns out we just couldn't get it done. A lot of things prevented the release of that game. So, and what made me sad about that is not that UT3 didn't ship, because UT3, whether it's a good game or a bad game, it's just a game. You always got to be worrying about the next game. What made me sad is that going forward, the engine didn't have Linux support for many, many years, up until Unreal Engine 4. Whereas with Unreal Engine 2, licensees would buy the engine. They would license the engine, and if you just put it on Linux machine and type make, it would just work right out of the box, and that wasn't true for Unreal Engine 3. It's never been true for Unreal Engine 3. That makes me sad. I think there's a lot of games we probably lost because of that, for what that's worth.
So if Ropey in the chat is asking, and I have to follow up on that, what about Red Orchestra 2 or Rising Storm, if you can talk about it, if there's ever anything going to happen or not?
Believe it or not, it's actually still on my to-do list, but there are a lot of things on my to-do list. But I did say that you should buy it, and I do have access to the source code, and I do intend to do it at some point. But it's not going to be today.
That's all I wanted to hear. Just some solid information on it, because you couldn't wrangle it out of Tripwire. So I wrangled it out of you. I'm happy now.
I think Tripwire would be happy if I did that port, but I don't think they're expecting me to do it today or anything like that. I think they would have loved for that to have shipped a year ago, but there's been a lot of demands. I mean, my work life has gotten very busy once SteamOS kicked off. I mean, everyone got very excited about Linux games, and my personal life at home is like I mean, I work at home. My office I have a home office, but that makes me kind of like I'm not a stay-at-home dad. I guess I'm a work-at-home dad. So it turns out a lot of my day goes to chasing a toddler around, which I love. I think it's great. But you'd be surprised that like it gets to the point where in the early 2000s, I would work for 18, 20 hours a day, pass out for 12 hours, get up and do it again. And it turns out once you have children, your sleep cycle doesn't work that way anymore. You're not really permitted to work that way, whether you like it or not. So, and I think that has affected my productivity. I feel like there's a lot of games that, and a lot of projects I want to finish that I haven't been able to, or haven't been able to finish as quickly. Because of constraints on my time that's changed. But kids grow up. She'll go to kindergarten eventually. She goes to school 3 days a week now to a preschool, and she went 2 days the year before. Next year it'll be four. You'd be surprised you get your time back as time goes on. But in the last couple of years, it's like the market for Linux games blowing up didn't exactly coincide with my timeline for life, so just work around that the best we can. But what the casualties of that are things like nobody's paying me to do Red Orchestra 2, and there's lots of other people that are paying me to do stuff, and I'm already behind on all their projects. So like I said, it's not forgotten. I absolutely do want to do it. I like the game. I think it's cool, and I think it has a vibrant community too, and I'd like to get that game running on Linux while there still is a vibrant community.
Yeah, sure.
DerRidda's question raises something that I wanted to ask your opinion on. Do you feel that contractors should be the sort of primary point of contact for the public who are interested to know about what's being worked on?
It depends on the game. It depends on the studio, and it depends on a lot of factors. The thing is, there are no two contracts I do that are alike. Some people want a lot of control over it. Some of them are just like, just put it on Steam when you're done and don't talk to us about it. And it depends on a lot of factors. I think the important thing is that you do have a primary point of contact, and I'm not always terribly good at that. In fact, sometimes I really kind of hate that. But oftentimes when we're talking about like the work I'm doing, I'm probably in the best position to know what's going on with it. So I do think that if you're asking me philosophically, you should never ever have a contractor talking to the public, but in practice it doesn't work that way.
In the end, you are the person who probably knows most about the state of the project in a lot of the cases, or almost all of them.
And there have been one or two times with games in the past where I've announced that I'm working on it or it's done, and the companies come back and they're like, "Oh, I wish you hadn't said that publicly because we don't have a press release ready, or we would have liked to have managed the PR on this or whatnot." And and I understand that, and it happens too. And it's like it's gotten to the point where it's like announcing something before it's literally getting uploaded to Steam has bit me in the ass so many times that generally I won't talk about something until it's literally shipping now. Whereas before I used to keep a plan file where I'd just be like, here, I'm 25% done on this game. By the way, I'm working on this. It's like I don't do that so much anymore because generally I end up regretting that. And the first time I really, really regretted that was Unreal Tournament 3. And it wasn't Epic emailed me and they're really mad that I announced I was working on it. I was like, it wasn't me. Mark talked about it in an interview somewhere, and they're like, oh, okay. But I think everyone in their life would have been much happier if no one had ever mentioned the Linux version of that until it was ready to ship, which is to say never at all. So that's just, you don't know. We didn't know it wasn't going to ship, It's just how it worked out.
Yeah, I think Mark had said on the forums that the Linux support was, like there was going to be a Linux client on the disk like there was with UT 2004.
Yeah, Mark is a really... When you think about Mark Rain, you should think about P.T. Barnum. He can sell... I remember someone telling me that worked at Epic that they had gone to go buy like a Honda Civic or something because they needed a new car. And they had told Mark this, and Mark's like, no, dude. No, you're not buying a Honda Civic. And talked the guy into going over to like the Lamborghini dealership or something like that. And like walked out there with like a Lamborghini. And he's like, what the fuck just happened? Mark Rain happened, man. That dude can sell you anything. He's really good at it. I don't know if that's a negative to say that. I think that's a positive. That's quite a talent. Not many people have that. But Mark, if Mark felt that Linux support was going to be one more bullet point, he was absolutely going to talk about it. And we had shipped several games with Epic, so I had shipped several games with Epic, so it wasn't even unreasonable to assume that this one would ship too. But it just didn't work out that way. I mean, it wasn't wrong of him to announce it, but it just kind of... Like, I think even Epic was surprised that he had done it that early, and it just kind of, well, it's like, okay, now we're talking about it, so that's how that went down.
So getting back to games, another game that was ported within the last, I don't know, 6 months, I guess, was Limbo, which you had previously had a go on, had you? Or had they previously had a go on it?
Limbo has a long, complicated history. We had there was talk of doing it. I'm trying to remember what the details of this was. It was um, they wanted to do it for Humble Bundle. Humble Bundle wanted it because it was an incredible game, and Limbo, the people that played it, the people who did Limbo, wanted it because it was another market, and they love all their markets. So we talked about it, and I looked at it, and they had this piece of middleware called WWise, which is it's the audio layer. It makes noises in the game. The music and the sound effects come through WWise, and we didn't have a Linux port of it, and we didn't have source code to it, and WWise doesn't work like SDL or Fmod or something where you can just be like, play this wave file. Like it wants to build up this whole complicated data file which is proprietary. You can't just drop in something else that makes bleeps and bloops and have it work. So it wasn't practical to just rip out WWise. Like I've ripped Fmod out of many games at this point because it's just a way to play sounds, whereas Fmod's this whole system for building up sound scenes and stuff like that. So we talked about it, and I was like, I think I can do the port really quickly, but we're also going to need to solve the WWise problem. And we decided we couldn't do it. So they went back to Humble Bundle and said, we're going to talk to these people that are building the system called Wine. And I rolled my eyes. I was like, no! But what can you do? So they shipped the Wine version of Limbo with Humble Bundle. And I think, if I had to guess, Humble Bundle probably regretted that decision. I don't think it's worked out well for them. I think they probably were... I think they probably had a lot of problems. A lot of Linux users were very unhappy that they had done that. And I understand the value of Wine. Like there are games we're never going to get ported, and it's better to be able to at least emulate them than anything else. So I understand that, but I think that people were like, if I'm paying you money, I want a real port. And I think they probably got some grief over that, and I think Playdead probably got some grief over that. So literally years later, we revisited this, and someone had made contact with WWise, and they're like, yeah, we'll give you source code, you can do a port, and then it started going forward again from that. And it was just one day we just kind of popped that out, surprise, here's a native version, even if your current version is working fine, here you go, we're going to put it on Steam. And I think in the long run, everyone was really happy with how it turned out. It's one of my favorite games ever, without a doubt. And it just... one day we just had one less emulated game in our Steam libraries and our Humble Bundle libraries.
And on that note of Codeweavers doing ports, they had the first crack at DerRidda as well.
Yeah, apparently my secondary career is just taking business away from Codeweavers.
We don't mind it.
I didn't even realize I was doing that. Sorry, Codeweavers, I didn't mean to.
But that was the first third-party source game to be ported, if I remember correctly.
Is it? Is it? I'm not sure if that's true. It might be true. I don't know.
Anybody else got a better memory than me? I thought it was.
It could be. I don't know. It's hard to say. I will say this though, is that so Epic is selling an engine. They're selling Unreal Engine. And they have a team that builds Unreal Engine, but Valve doesn't really have that for Source. I mean, they will license the Source engine to you if you want, but they don't really have full-time support on it. They don't really even have full-time developers on it. That's not true. They do, but at Valve, you do whatever you want. So if one day you didn't want to work on Source anymore, you wanted to go build hats for Team Fortress, you could just do it, and nobody really stops you. So it's not. I don't think anyone is really there at Valve that's interested in building an engine market. Like, they just happen to have an engine, and they're happy to let you use it if you're interested, and they'll make a deal with you for that. But so what we ended up doing was so Dear Esther, they wanted to get that on Linux, and there is no Linux version of Source. There's actually just Portal 2 has their copy of the engine, and Left 4 Dead has their copy of the engine, and blah blah blah. So there was a lot of, with Dear Esther, trying to figure out exactly what version of the engine they fucking used on this thing. And we never exactly figured it out, but a lot of it was like, I'm having this bug where, the fog isn't rendering correctly, and they're like, oh, go look in the Counter-Strike branch, see if I think we fixed something about it there. And there was a lot of like trolling through Valve's Perforce to try and find fixes for various things, and coerce the thing to work and stuff like that. And it took a lot of work, a lot of like, okay, what did Portal 2 do here? Because I know this totally works in this version of the game. And but yeah, eventually we got it going, and it took a while. It took a long time to get that thing to actually run as an Hang on, I'm gonna just say something here because I knew this was coming up in the chat room. Wine is an emulator. Anyone that tells you otherwise, that's just bullshit PR. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
So that is also reflected in some way in some licensees, like the developers of Insurgency or the Stanley Parable not being able to get out Linux versions because they can't get the source they need for that from Valve.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if they can't get the source. I'm sure they could totally work that out. I've never met anyone at Valve that wouldn't be like, yeah, man, I'll hook you up. It's cool, and especially to a licensee. But the problem is not that they would need the source code. The problem is that they would probably need lots and lots of different versions of the source code. So I actually talked to the Stanley Parable guys at one point because that game is incredible. If you haven't played it, you're missing out. But and at the time they were still thinking they were going to do it on their own. I should check back with them and see. Like I would think that even with access to all the source code, they would still have a hard time getting it to work on Linux because it's just kind of there's a lot of surgery involved. A lot of like you would have to make this like Frankenstein's monster of source engine to get the thing to run on Linux. And I've been through that, so I could probably do it for them. But I don't know what their interest level is at this point about it. But and that's not really a fault on Valve. It's just not like you can't judge Valve as an engine company because they're not doing the same thing that Epic does, and they're not doing the same thing that Crytek does or Unity. Like the engine is something they have, but it's not their focus. It's not their interest at all. It's like they want to make games and they want to run Steam, and these are just the engine existing at all is because they need an engine to do those things. But so I wouldn't even fault Valve for that. It's just the way it is.
So moving on to another topic, just sort of looking at the Linux gaming as this kind of timeline, I guess. What do you think are the most significant and noteworthy events for Linux gaming and for game development for Linux that have happened in the past 20 years?
Oh, I think you can look at probably 4 or 5 things, and there's always little micro events like Unreal Tournament 2004 shipped. And it's like hooray, that's a world-class game. But in the grand scheme of things, that's not that important. But I would say if you had to pick them out, it's Loki Software existing, the creation of Loki Software, because it showed that the tech was there. And I remember many years ago there was a I forget the name of it. It was the Galactic Civilizations. I remember there was an OS2 or BIOS. Hang on, I'm gonna start over here. I think it was BIOS. I don't know. There was some game. Okay, I remember what it is now. I remember. Okay, Civilization Call to Power was the game that Loki started with. There was also a BIOS port of that, and people on BIOS said, "Look, this is legitimacy. We have arrived. There's a commercial video game available for this system." And I think Galactic Civilizations was an OS2 game. But it's the same thing. Like people can declare legitimacy as soon as like a commercial AAA video game arrives for your platform. But all that really shows you is that the technology's there. And the thing is, like, if you want to do an OS2 game today, you couldn't because there's no OpenGL, or there is, but it's OpenGL 1.0, and bloody like that. And Loki showed us that the technology existed, and they spent time building the tools for the things that didn't exist. So I would say Loki's important, and then Humble Bundle's important, then SteamOS is important, or Valve getting into Linux, I should say, and then Unreal Engine 4. If you had to pick a handful of things, those are the things that are the watershed moments in Linux gaming right now that led to big increases in the quality of Linux gaming or the quantity of Linux gaming.
And what do you think is the next most significant hurdle for Linux gaming at the moment?
The next hurdle is going to be whether SteamOS is successful or not. I mean, the nice thing about SteamOS is you do not ship a SteamOS version of your game. You ship a Linux binary. When you upload your game to Steam, you tell it this is the Windows build, or this is the Mac build, or this is the Linux build, and there is no option for SteamOS. What you ship on SteamOS is literally what you ship on desktop Linux. It's the same binary, with no distinction whatsoever. So the question is going to be, do Steam machines ship? Are they successful? Do people like the controller? Does SteamOS become a thing that people just kind of have in their houses, and we could be entering an era where people buy consoles the way they buy Android phones, where it's like you get what works for you theoretically, and you don't. It's all roughly the same platform, but you can customize to what you want. Like if your mom wants to just play, casual match 3 games, you get her a Steam box that costs $50 and has a crappy GPU in it, and is the size of like a deck of playing cards and plugs into her TV, and she never thinks about it. But if you want to play like AAA, like, Unreal Tournament 52 or something like that. You buy like $1,000 Steam box with a bitchin' GPU and blah blah blah, and and then we stop talking about how much Xbox costs or how much PlayStation 4 costs if it works out. I don't know if it's going to work out. We're going to have to see, but it changes the entire dynamics of that market. And if that is successful, then we get lots and lots of Linux games, and we get lots and lots of money coming into the Linux market, and that's a good thing. And we stop talking about console generations anymore. We don't talk about the Xbox 360 versus the Xbox One, which is deeply confusing. But that's where we are. The PlayStation 3, 4, 5, 6, 12, whatever. So the question for Linux gaming is going to be, can Valve pull that off? And if they can't pull it off, do we already have enough critical mass to keep going without it? I don't know. We're gonna have to wait and see. I don't know how it's going to go until it happens. So I will tell you that I've said this before, that I was in a taxi to WWDC, the Apple Developer Conference, the year they announced that they're switching from PowerPC to Intel, and I was having a heated conversation on my cell phone in this taxi, saying Apple would never switch away from the PowerPC. They're probably going to announce a deal with IBM to make a better PowerPC chip than they had before. That's what you're going to hear tomorrow. And I was wrong. Obviously I was wrong, and Apple runs on Intel parts now, but I don't know the future, and even things that seem really obvious I get wrong all the time. So we'll have to see what Valve pulls off. But I think that is the question for Linux gaming, is how well they do in the next few years in terms of getting people to the platform.
I thought it was pretty funny to hear Carmack say, he doesn't think what Valve is doing is the right direction, but he's been wrong before, and they'll probably succeed just because they're Valve.
Well, to be fair to John Carmack, he's very smart, but every time he talks about the success of Linux gaming, he talks about Quake 3 didn't sell many copies. Quake 3 for Linux was an incredibly botched launch.
Yeah.
It's just Loki decided they want to ship in these crazy tin cases, these collector edition things. They got hung up in customs in China for like a month, so everyone bought the Windows version and then downloaded the Linux binaries, and it just wasn't a good launch. They made a lot of mistakes, and it wasn't a good deal for Loki. It wasn't a good deal in general, and for 15 years after that, John Carmack's like, Quake 3 didn't sell well, so Linux is a dead market. Asshole, it's been 15 years. Maybe something has changed. Maybe something's given. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't understand how he can sort of believe that his perspectives are current. It's mind-boggling.
I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but every time he talks about it, that seems to be how he references it. But
right.
And
not only that, but then he brings back Quake Live, which is basically Quake 3 again, and complains that it doesn't sell well. And it's like, come on.
Well, but the thing, to be fair to him, I applaud him for taking a risk, because the thing wasn't it was Quake 3. The thing was it runs in your web browser, and that might have actually just been a decade early. So I give him applause for that. Okay, fine, but the thing is, John Carmack has always tried to do, things that were revolutionary. Like what he's doing right now is he's working at Oculus, Facebook, sorry, but he's working on trying to make 3D 3D goggles, the things we use to play video games. He might succeed, he might fail, but that's a gamble, and there's a lot of factors involved. And I don't understand how someone that has his whole life had that entrepreneurial spirit can be like, this didn't work based on one data point from 15 years ago. So I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I see it.
On the topic of SteamOS and Steam machines, John Drinkwater in chat asks what your opinions of the Steam controller are, if you've had a chance to mess around with it much.
I think if your house is burning down, you're stuck on the second floor, throw the USB cable out the window and you can climb down.
Let's go tough cable.
It's got like a 30-foot cable. Like it literally stretches like multiple floors of a building if you had to like climb down something. Jokes aside, the revision of the Steam controller that we all have is from Steam Dev Days, and it's way, way out of date. It's not going to look like whatever they finally end up shipping. It's interesting. The problem with that controller, that prototype that we have, is that none of the games support it. And so you end up with it in this default keyboard and mouse emulation mode, and it doesn't do that very well. But if you switch that thing over to what I call Xbox 360 mode, so those two little discs, those two little touchpads, basically just work like analog sticks, it's really responsive. It's a nice little piece of hardware. But most games aren't using that right now, and you have to explicitly turn it on in your game to switch it to that mode. So I think a lot of people probably played with that controller, they got to touch it, and it was like, this thing sucks. it's actually not bad, but you have to get into the right mode. But any discussion about it is absolutely irrelevant because it's not going to look like that or feel like that when they ship the final thing. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
Is this thing on? Like, I noticed I'm not muted. Does this work?
Oh, hey, how's it going? A wild flibbit appears.
Yeah, I actually wanted. Can I just like interrupt? This is like a cameo, but
No.
Do it, man.
But like the thing is, one of the things I like sort of said in chat when you guys were talking about like what does Valve need to do. Something they really need to do is dev kits, which they actually sort of did with the Intel boxes that we got. But one of the reasons that nobody's doing controller support is because we don't have them and we can't get them, even though we really want them. Like we all have like their first revision, but it's now so old and they've done so many revisions that like the way that Steam tries to interop with the Steam controller doesn't work anymore. So like if I try to configure the left touchpad with the keyboard bindings, it actually crashes Steam because it's like just that old for God knows what reason. So
Yeah, I think what they're telling you is that like please don't use this version anymore. And I think if you look at the number of games that have it enabled on Steam right now, I turned it on Super Meat Boy. So if you have one of those controllers, presumably if it still works, I guess it doesn't. Like it was a good experience with that, but most games it's just not. And I think they're like just wait for the next revision. They're still working on it, I think.
yeah, like Transistor is the only one that I have that uses it, and even then, like they told me when I was doing the Linux version, they were like, "Oh yeah, by the way, we added Steam controller support." And I'm like, "You guys have the new one?" And they went, "No, we just sort of looked at what it said like in the picture, and we sort of mapped it, and we think it makes sense, but we actually can't tell."
Yeah, and there's some things about that controller. And again, this is old revisions. I think they've changed this now, but like you can't just it doesn't look like a controller. You have to talk to it through Steamworks, which means that you can't talk to it unless you're running a Steam game. But also, like, it won't talk. You can't talk to it through SDL. Like, it just doesn't show up as a regular game controller in your list of game controllers. So even
Technically, it does, but
Does
like
it now?
it does. Well, I think it's the thing that I think I asked you about when I first got it, and you were like, "Oh, wait." Where it marks itself as a controller and it shows up in like SDL joystick, but it doesn't actually send input. I think that's still the case.
That's true. It looks like an Xbox 360 controller or a direct input device, but it never ever sends input through that interface. So, but my point being that if you want to use this thing, you probably have written your code in your game for game controllers, and then you have a totally separate path for the Steam controllers, and these two might have to interact. Like you might have 3 of these controllers and a Steam controller, and that becomes a huge mess, especially in games that are already written. It's just like I just want to use the joystick code that already works. I just want to know if X is pressed, and it's a mess. It's a huge mess, and but again, I think that what they're doing is one, they're fixing that because I think that was probably the primary complaint everyone had. But also, they're making the controller look totally different. So it doesn't make sense to be like, this is the API you use when this might not make sense if suddenly we decide buttons are useless. Now everything's a touchpad or something. I don't know. I don't know what they're doing. So that's probably why they're not talking much about it because it's going to be something different or whatever. They've lost interest. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see if they have like. I think the thing that I sent them was like if you end up having enough buttons to make an X input mode, there's like a controller from Logitech that has like a D input mode and an X input mode, and it's like I think it's a physical switch on the controller that does this, and it's like
Yeah, it is.
maybe that's what they need to do.
I don't know. I hope they figure it out. I mean,
Yeah, I want those touchpads. I really do.
I do too, and it's like I do think that was probably the most interesting thing because they have to solve a problem that the console makers don't. You might have a game that only works with the mouse or only works with the joystick, or only works with the keyboard. And I understand where they're coming from there, but yeah, I don't know. I think it needs some work still, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. I'm going to duck out now. I'm going to try and be quiet from now on.
Thanks for dropping in, man. It's been fun.
Yeah, I'll stick around, of course.
We might bring you back when we talk about Bleed.
I take back everything I said about you being a machine. Ha 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 ha.
The reason I'm a machine is because, to be fair, I don't have a 3-year-old at home, so...
Well, what I would recommend is about 3-year-olds is you just wait till they get older. That's usually the best strategy for them. So she's a lovely girl, but my gosh, she's tiring. I'm exhausted all the time. So
yeah, I'm in my early 20s, so I can do that 30-hour day and not feel a thing.
see, the thing I'm finding though is that like I am doing that 30-hour day. It's just not all coding. Mostly it's chasing someone around that wants to play princess and tea parties. So, which you'd be surprised, tea parties are exhausting.
Oh yeah, I bet.
Kids are the best.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're all here about tea parties. So if you guys want me to like make fun of somebody, I can totally like trash on Crytek or something. I don't know.
Make fun of Peter Molyneux. I was robbed of my chance. No, don't do that. Don't do that. We better move on with actual topics.
So moving on to some questions and observations from chat that we've skipped over. Darksim offers some hugs. What kind of reception do you feel you've had from Linux gamers? It feels like you're probably the most notable and most prominent porter that's out there.
What kind of reaction do I have?
Do you get like what kind of because I see a lot of love flowing in your direction.
I have people that like me, and I think that's nice. And I feel like this is not a Linux problem. I think it's a gamer problem where it's like I think our default mode is very our default mode as consumers of video games is very manic depressive or bipolar. I don't know what the word is I'm looking for here, where it's like if something's broken, I get some nasty ass shit said to me. But as soon as you fix it, they show you a lot of love. And I feel like maybe if we could meet somewhere in the middle on those emotions, things would be better. But occasionally I'll bitch that I'm having a bad day, and like people I don't know will tweet me to be like, you're doing great work, and I really appreciate that. And it's more of that would be nice. But it's really, really easy in a bug tracker or on a forum for a game to think that the game developers don't see the mean things you say about them. And, it does affect them. You'd be surprised. That's not just me. That's game developers in general. No one likes to hear that they spent years working on something and then see the forums full of people being like, these people suck. Yeah, they fix stupid little bugs. Like, it's that simple, right? So, but I don't know.
Learn to program.
Yeah, basically, so someone emailed me once to be like, don't kid yourself. You're not a programmer. You're just a porter. Oh shit, that's true. They caught me. But it's overall, I think that most people are very nice. I mean, I think that gamer mentality I mentioned is not unique to me. I think that's every game developer gets that. And I said to some troll on Twitter the other day that it's like, hey man, Windows developers don't like you either. They just have a financial motivation to put up with your bullshit. And
Wow.
it's just kind of, I think it's a toxic attitude, and I think that if everyone could be better about that, that would make everyone much happier. And bugs exist sometimes, and especially when you're into console games, people are like, why haven't they fixed this bug yet? It's and on consoles, on Xbox and PlayStation, it's like fixing a bug isn't as easy as pooping out a new Steam update. Like you pay Microsoft $30,000 and wait several weeks before it goes live, so you can't just fix one bug. And there are often restraints beyond just like oh, I forgot a semicolon here. Boop. Okay, I fixed it. Ship it. And that's just how it goes. But I would say most people are very nice to me. I don't know. It's fine. I find when I'm producing good work, people are nicer, and when I do less good work, then I get more grief. But that's just how it goes.
Do you feel like there's a bit more effort in maintaining and bug fixing a port that's come after development when you're going to be chasing a moving target that might be the original platform, and you're also having to dig through somebody else's code?
It depends on the game, of course, but I find that games that have shipped and they're not touching anymore are much easier. The ideal situation is you're working on it all along, and it's ported to Linux way ahead of time, and I'm laughing at someone in the chat room here is talking about how Linux gaming starts in 2016 because there's too many tea parties at Iculus' home. It's true. It's true. Print that headline. If you're working all along, like that's what we did with the original Unreal Tournament 2003, is that I literally lived in Epic's offices. Like I would sleep under a desk, get up in the morning, and do more work on the Linux port, and stumble home every couple of days, and that was really solid by the time we were done. But like that's a full-time job. Like you give them all your attention, and that's not necessarily practical in most cases. And a lot of times there wasn't Linux work to do. It was just the game was continuing to be built, and I would fix things as time goes on. But in the end, that probably produced a better product at a much higher personal cost. But the worst games are the ones that have shipped, but they're still doing updates to, because they break things all the time. They being any developer, not any specific one. The easiest ones after the fact are the ones where they've shipped the game and they've moved on to the next one. Or maybe there'll be a patch to fix a few things, but that's it. Because it stops being a moving target. And you'd be surprised how much code will break from day to day when people are working on it. And that becomes very it's really easy to get demotivated when you're working on something. It's like, okay, it's running on Linux, and then you update from the original developer's revision control, and suddenly there's include lines that have the wrong file name case and stuff. And you're like, oh fuck, I don't want to do all this again. I just did all this shit. So in many cases, it's easier to not be cooperating at that point. Just be like, it's done. Don't touch it anymore. I will do my part, and we'll all be happy. It's complicated though. It depends on the game.
So on a similar note, I guess, Evropi in chat asks what your hardest port has been.
God, let me think about that for a few minutes. I'll get back to you. The thing is, video game ports are. Tolstoy said this, that all happy families are happy in the same way, but unhappy families are all unhappy in their own unique way. Something like that was the quote. Video game ports are the same way. It's like all the easy ports they're just easy. Just knock out a port and you go on to the next thing. It's not a big deal. But the ones that have problems, man, they're all unique. You never hit the same obstacle twice in many cases, and everyone's got their biggest fish story of like, oh my god, that's a bad bug, but wait till you hear this one, and it's like there are a lot of games that were easier to port and harder to port, but I couldn't say that one was necessarily harder than another. They were just hard in different ways. And sometimes like, well, we couldn't get this middleware, or we got it and it caused other problems. When we did the 64-bit version of Unreal Tournament 2003, we did it to show off what at the time was AMD's brand new 64-bit architecture, which did not exist when we first made this game. And like there were several desperate nights. We were trying to get this running because they wanted to show it at GDC or E3, I forget what it was. It was Comdex. And they wanted to have the president of AMD up on stage with Mark Rain and Tim Sweeney and showing off, here's the 64-bit version of Unreal Tournament 2003. And we spent many nights desperately trying to get this done before we literally had to take the computer and get on a plane, because this was the only 64-bit system available to us. Like you couldn't go to Best Buy and buy a 64-bit processor at the time. So we had an experimental distribution of Linux. I think it was SUSE or something like that, and that has 64-bit compiler and a 64-bit kernel, and we got it going, and we finally got the last bug fixed just in time to take that computer on the plane with us to Las Vegas and show the game in a keynote at Comdex using the same computer that was under my desk with my feet on it a few hours earlier. And the physics library that is in that's in Unreal Tournament 2003 is called Math Engine. It's called Karma. It's by a company called Math Engine, and they're in England, and they had a 64-bit system that was mailed to them by AMD, and they had to get their part because we didn't have source code to it. So they had to get their stuff running on 64 bits, and they did it, and they sent us static libraries so we could link them in. And we had, right before we were getting on this plane, we had a crash where the thing would just crash if you called this important function, whatever it is. So we got them on the phone, and we're like, okay, it seems to be this. And they're like, well, that should just be debug code, so we should just have to not call that function. It won't be a big deal, but we can't help you with it. And we said, why not? And they said, because our machine caught fire last night.
Wow.
And we said, what? It literally caught fire and burned, and it was the end of their machine. That was the only 64-bit machine they had. There's only like 5 of these in existence, and we had one, and they had one, and like, a couple other people had them. But and I was told by another developer that was also working out their machine had caught fire. Apparently, they fixed this before they shipped to the public. But it literally came down to we had to patch the binary so it wouldn't make that call that would crash, because we didn't have source code, and they couldn't give us source code to rebuild it, and they did not have a machine to build it themselves. So it's not the worst bug I've ever had, but it's the most interesting one.
Wow, you must have probably, I can't think of anybody else who's looked at as much game code from different developers as you have. It must be quite interesting to see all the nastiness that doesn't get talked about.
Well, so the source code to the original Descent 1, like, the 3D, you fly a spaceship around a mine, they gave out the source code to that many years ago, back in the 90s, and there's a README file that comes with it that is presented in the form of an interview with the main developers on that game. And one of the questions is, if you're interested in game development, what part of the code should we look at to learn something? And they said none of it. And they're like, there's nothing in this that you think's good? And they're like, not a single line of this code is worth looking at. This code is awful. But that fucker shipped, and that was a great game. So there's a good lesson in that without looking at any code. Lots of games are not. I've seen a lot of code that's bad, and I've seen a lot of game developers that are like, oh, I would open source my game, but the code's terrible. And it's like, dude, every video game is terrible. It's just that's how game development works. There comes a point where you have to either make pretty code or ship a game, and those are your choices. You can't do both. And eventually, even games that start out with really clean code bases, they're going to eventually have to sacrifice code quality to get the game out the door. It's just how it works. So yeah, every piece of game code I've ever seen is terrible, with the exception of Quake 3 Arena. That thing is a thing of beauty.
Nice.
And you can see that that's open source, of course, but it's a thing of beauty. You'd be amazed at how high they kept the code quality in that thing, and the amazing number of things that you're like, Jesus, that's a really brilliant fucking problem they just solved there. So it's worth looking at. If you want to look at a game that is well done and doesn't have really nasty code, I would say go get the source code to Quake 3 Arena.
It does seem like ID might be a little bit further ahead than most other studios when it comes to keeping good practices around that stuff.
It's hard to say. I mean, even before John Carmack left, after Quake 3, their programming staff bulked up a lot, and they moved from C to C++, and, there are certain concessions that one makes in that, too. And I don't think Doom 3 is bad code, but you can see there's a definite change in the way that they write code between Quake 3 and Doom 3, and those two revisions of the engine. So, and God knows, it could just be like Lord of the Flies over there now. I don't really know what id Software looks like at this point.
So, on that note of being able to look at so many different companies, your workflows and ways of doing things and stuff, I mean, are there any commonalities or trends that you think are worthwhile, and are there any things that you've spotted that you think would be things that game developers should avoid to make porters' jobs easier?
Well, yes. The first thing is middleware, and every game has it now. It's just how it works. It's very hard to write a game from scratch and not use any middleware. And to be fair, if you want to think about it that way, things like SDL, they're middleware. They just happen to be perhaps more environmentally friendly than other people's middleware, but they're still middleware. But you got to watch out, because that's what absolutely can kill you in these things. You want to pick middleware that either has a port to whatever platform you care about or will give you source code. And frankly, I would say at this point, if they won't give you source code, you should flip them the bird and go pick different middleware. Like, it's 2015, man. If you can't get the source code to something, it's like, we're not inventing flying cars here. Everyone can get a goddamn audio library with source code at this point, but you got to watch out, because there's been more than one game that has been torpedoed by not being able to get the source code to the middleware, or can't get a port of it or whatever. And, there's things where, Scaleform, for example, we use that in Shank and other games too. But and we had a Linux port and a Mac port of Scaleform, which is it does more or less, it lets you write Flash programs inside your game, so you can have your UI written in Flash. As horrifying as that is, it's very easy to find artists and developers that know Flash and have done it on web pages, so it makes it easier to make a GUI inside your game. But Flash, Scaleform has Scaleform, which is their library, and they also have Scaleform Video, which is a third-party video codec that they don't own and they don't have the source code to. So they're like, here's a Linux port of Scaleform, so you can get your GUI, but if you have any full motion video in the game, we can't help you. So for Shank, we ended up taking these heroic measures of, we converted all of the original videos in that game, all the in-game movies, over to Og Theora, and I wrote a little library to do that, and then did an enormous amount of tap dancing to try and get this thing to put videos on the screen where Scaleform would have wanted them, while fighting with Scaleform to not trawl over them. And it's a mess. You don't want to have to find yourself in this situation. So watch your middleware, and don't take any middleware that doesn't have complete source code. Even if you have to do the Linux port yourself, if you don't have the source code, you might be totally screwed. And then, other than that, I would say try to write as little native code as you can. Try to write in a scripting language. It makes ports easier. As much as I dislike Unreal Script, I've never had to fix a Linux bug in Unreal Script before. It was always in the C++ parts of the engine. So those would be my two biggest tips. And I'm sure I've got 15 more, but, those are the things probably that you can make your life the easiest in terms of, making your game portable.
Nice.
So I have that engine that offers me the ability to either use C++ or Lua, and I think you have helped me in my decision to what I am going to hack in.
I mean, there's an enormous temptation to write in C++ because you're, a smarty man game developer when you're doing that. But there are benefits to scripting languages beyond that, such as you don't have to stop what you're doing and rebuild. Like, if you do it right, you can just be like, I just updated the script and the game carries on, and I can see if my bug is fixed or not, whatever. But yeah, generally speaking, when I have games with bugs in them, I always assume it's not in the scripting language. It's almost always in the C++ code somewhere. So in a perfect world, you want to try to be pick your favorite scripting language. I don't care what. I like Lua. Other people like other things. It's fine. But you want to try to use C++ for things that have to move super, super fast. But the thing is, that advice gets less useful as time goes on, because even things like CPUs are basically as fast as they're going to get, and we're just adding more cores at this point. But generally, we're GPU bound on games now. We're not bound by how fast the CPU is going, give or take. So even parts that you should do in C++ for speed, you might still be able to do in a scripting language. I mean, until you get into like ridiculous things like your blitting, software blitters or something like that. But so yeah, more and more of it pushed into a.
You kind of cut out there?
Can you say again?
Last thing we heard was even more and more.
Oh, I could have said that an hour ago. I don't know. Yes. No, your game gets, I don't know, I was saying more and more portable, and I really don't know how long you were waiting for me to talk there. So let's move on.
But just a second. It's all good.
Okay. Well, anyway, it works out. Okay, go on.
A question from chat. LinuxM was asking about the origins of the name Iculus.
Oh well, it's a band. It's not a band. There's a band called Fish. That's PHISH. Like back before that was a malware type of thing. It's one of those like jam bands. Like people follow them around the country and take a great deal of drugs, like this, the Grateful Dead, that kind of thing, or Widespread Panic or something like that. But Fish was one that I liked a lot in college, and they have an album called The Man Who Stepped Into Yesterday, I think is what it's called. Losing my mind here. And it was the lead singer's like college senior project or something like that, and he built this concept album about this guy that steps into another land and meets all these strange characters and blah blah blah. And one of the characters on that album is the great and wise Iculus, and he's a prophet on top of a mountain, and he has the helping friendly book, spell with a PH on friendly, and is the holder of all wisdom or something like that. So when I went to Loki, everyone there almost everyone there had a username for their email and login on the system that was a mythical creature. We had, someone named Mindbender. We had someone named Hercules. Scott Draker, the guy who owned the company, was Highlander, because there can be only one, I guess. But and I came in there and he goes, "What do you want for a username?" I said, just, R Gordon or Gordon R or something's fine with me. RC Gordon. He goes, "Okay, now pick a username that doesn't suck." All right, fine. So, and I was like, if we're all doing mythical creatures, I'll go with Iculus, and it just stuck from there. So, so it's a reference to a song by Fish, and I just kind of kept going with it.
Sweet. We have a bunch of people in chat who are going, "I will finally know." So I guess people wanted to know.
Well, now you know, and knowing is half the battle.
I wanted to do that. You stole that.
Dun 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 dun.
But yeah.
Dear. Earlier in chat, we had someone asking if you had plans to update update Psychonauts to use SDL2 for better input mapping and stuff. I guess this comes back to like, who ends up maintaining a port once it's been done, and I know that varies from project to project, but maybe you can talk about how things work with how you organize things with your clients.
Well, for the most part, yeah, it does vary game by game, but the vast majority of the projects I've worked on, after I'm done, nobody maintains it, which is a terrifying way to run things. And there are games that I patched for 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years after it shipped because nobody else was going to do it. And for a long time I thought I'll just patch every game I've ever worked on forever. But then you get to the point where you've got dozens and dozens of games, and you have to go, maybe this isn't worth patching anymore. And some games get abandoned faster than that, and some longer than that. But generally speaking, there's nobody on site. Usually, even when I'm done with a game, nobody even says, "Hey, can we have a copy of the source code to the Linux version of it?" Usually, I have to be like, "You should definitely put this in a safe somewhere, or in revision control, or print it out and just put it on a shelf or something." But usually, you have to tell them that. They don't even think about it. It's not something they're even particularly interested in. So yeah, so it's a concern. It's a real concern. But what was I gonna say? Oh, but to answer the question about Psychonauts, I would like to do that because Psychonauts was one of the last SDL 1.2 games I did, and there's a lot of things that are really, really nice in SDL2, like game controller support and full screen desktop and stuff, and it could get a huge boost from that. Like, it would be a much more pleasant experience, but nobody's working on that right now. One thing I am working on is something we're calling SDL 1.2 Compat, whereas to say, we hand you a little library that looks like SDL 1.2, but what it's doing on the back end is talking to a real version of SDL 2.0. So your game still thinks it's talking to 1.2, but it's actually talking to the much nicer 2.0, which, among other things, might get you Wayland support, for your games, even though the game has never been updated and stuff. So at a minimum, that's eventually going to ship, and at a minimum, that will solve some of the problems of compatibility on older games. But in a perfect world, I take the time to update Psychonauts, and I don't think it would take long. It's just, there's 15 other things, and there's still people that remind me that I tweeted you should totally buy a copy of Red Orchestra 2 for $1. So it's all a question of time available and priority and stuff like that. So that's where that is. Yeah.
Nice.
Oh, to answer the person in chat, Nicholas Vining's name at Loki was Mordred.
I think did you guys, Nemoder, DerRidda, anyone in chat, do you guys have any other sort of questions that you wanted to ask before we move on with the rest of the show?
Not anything. It's not hard to get you talking, Ryan. You are an amazing guest.
Man, I could talk for an hour. You hear my voice is starting to fail me here. I ran out of coffee a while ago, so...
So yeah, let's move on with the rest of the show.
Alrighty, very quickly, touching on community stuff, we had TF2 event, an Altitude event, a Battle Block Theater event, and a Fistful of Frags event. Did any of you guys manage to make those?
Yeah, I didn't make the Team Fortress 2 event, but I did, I think, all the rest of them.
Yeah, I got to the Team Fortress 2 event. It was one of our quieter ones, but it was still a bit of fun. We played for a few hours. But Battle Block Theater was interesting.
Yeah.
Still had a couple of issues with latency there, I think.
Yeah, I didn't find latency too terrible. I just didn't quite know how to play, and it seemed that the people who had played it for a while had built up, I guess, unlocks or something that the new players didn't have.
Yeah, there are a couple of sort of like special attacks that you can unlock, but generally they're fairly balanced, I think.
It was certainly interesting. I can definitely see it being a much more fun couch kind of game where everybody's in the same room, but it wasn't too bad.
Yeah. And we had Fistful of Frags. It's been a while since we last played that, hey?
Yeah, we had a lot of people in that. It was pretty amusing, just doing some team deathmatch stuff. I still hope they add some more modes to it, but it was fun.
Yeah, I love the way that the people seem to just drop into that game, and the way that you kind of... Is it 4 or 5 teams? You don't see that often in deathmatch games.
Yeah. I think there's 4 different classes, and they each got their own models and everything, but... Yeah, it's just a lot of fun. There were certain new maps I think they've added, and they're really beautiful maps. So it was kind of neat just to explore new areas.
Yeah. All the maps are like really well designed as well. Like all the way that you move through the spaces and the cover and vulnerabilities that they provide. It's all really nicely and consciously designed, I think.
Yeah.
On the horizon, after we're done with the cast here, we've got a double action Boogaloo event. We have a larger Guns of Icarus online event scheduled for tomorrow. Worms Reloaded, and then closing out the month with Counter-Strike Global Offensive.
Yeah.
Which should be fun.
Absolutely.
I see people in chat are excited for Worms.
Yeah, the lobby problems are going to be so much fun.
Who knows, maybe Clan Wars will appear magically before then. If it does, we'll change it, but if not, we'll stick with Reloaded. Other community stuff that's been happening, Space Pope has put up a bunch of Don't Starve Together servers. We've got a Survival server, Wilderness server, and Endless server. And they seem to be getting a bit of love. It's an interesting game. It kind of, it doesn't feel like it's at its best when it's this kind of public server drop-in, drop-out type thing. On one of the servers, a lot of people played as Willow, the girl with the lighter, who sets things on fire when she goes insane, and so a number of the non-renewable resources appear to have mysteriously burned away. So we might need to restart that one, but in general, it's kind of fun to have that sort of different kind of play experience, I find.
Yeah, it's interesting. The way it scales is like, when you're just playing single player, your main concern isn't really food because you have plenty of food and you just kind of go through it and try to survive. Playing multiplayer, every new player adds that strain on your food reserves, but then the actual survival part becomes much easier because you can split off and lure monsters to different areas.
Yeah, it feels like
So it's certainly an interesting kind of play.
It feels like the very beginning is a lot harder when you've got 4 or 5 people. But if you coordinate to increase your resource gathering rather than focus on everyone picking up food, then it's not too hard to get by.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to get up to a point where you can start building farms, and as soon as you're at that point, then you can get food production up to a point where people can handle it. I do like the way that that spiders become a lot more integral to playing, and reads as well. Given that they're what allow you to resurrect other players and keep everybody's health up. So spiders is a renewable resource and is something that you have to actually farm and consciously manage. It's that aspect is different from the original game, I think.
Yeah. We finally got one of our servers up to like day 100, and it's like we're just at the point where we finally have everything we need, and then deer clops.
I'm playing a game where I'm about I think we're day 75 and we're just building our winter camp so that we can go and stay away from our main area during the winter if Declops does come. Or Winterclops, sorry.
Yeah, it's always the planning that is hindsight, I guess.
Yeah. So John has been doing a bunch of work on the website. If anybody has any feedback to share, definitely do so.
Yes, it's looking amazing now, but give us more feedback. What do you think? Also, one nice nugget on that page I don't think we had before is when you scroll all the way down, there's a bunch of links to different places, and the classic Steam-powered user forums where all our Linux lobbying started is linked there. I just wanted to point that out because it's like a time machine in computer years.
But yeah, it's good to see some of the bigger changes that we've been able to pull together for that. And I imagine we want to do a bit of a freeze, like a couple of weeks, where we just say, everybody in the community, please give us your feedback, and we'll make sure that we tie up any kind of niggles that people might have before we roll it out live. But I'm not sure when that's going to be. The Double Fine Game Club is still playing Grim Fandango, and we've had some guests joining us. This week, I think we have Brett Mogilevsky lined up, Brandon Dillon, who was senior programmer on the remastered edition, Oliver Franske, who was also a programmer on the remastered edition, and Brett that I mentioned earlier, he was the lead programmer on the original game. So it's going to be neat to have those perspectives, both the old and the new, on the game. So if anybody's interested in joining, feel free to do so. Also on the Grim Fandango front, DShara has put together a small fix for people who aren't running Pulse and are having trouble with audio in Grim Fandango. It's just a little application that intercepts some of the SDL calls and adjusts the buffer size or the sample size to match the buffer better, which I think I just explained poorly, but a bunch of people say it works for them, and Double Fine
Fixes audio, hooray!
Hooray! And Double Fine are also looking at that and seeing what they can do to fix it in the game as well, which is cool. Turgat has sent us an email to say that he is involved within organising the RMLL, which is the French Libre Software meeting. It takes place in Beauvais in France in July, and they've just released a call for papers. If anybody is interested in attending or submitting a talk, get in touch. And the other piece of community news is that I am resigning from administrative and owner duties.
And that makes us sad.
I'm going to go and focus more on game development and stuff, which is where I kind of wanted to go all along. But I'm still going to hang around, still going to be a part of the community. I'm going to make sure that I'm available if anybody needs a hand. We haven't yet settled on who is going to be taking over from my role, so if anybody has nominations, grab them, and if we don't get any nominations, I'll work out some way of randomly assigning it to one of our existing admins. So that pushes pressure onto you guys. You gotta find more people.
Well,
But yeah, thanks for all the faithful service. You have glued this thing together to make it what it is, and you made it something awesome.
yeah. Looking forward to see what you come up with.
Yeah, me too.
For your game development stuff, it'll be great.
Are you going to double down on your first-person blind people adventure game?
Yeah, my text adventure is the first major project, but part of what I'm also trying to do is also, alongside doing a major project, is find time to work on either an open source game or do a new prototype every kind of 6 months or so, plus one larger prototype a year, probably coinciding with 70 FPS. And that way I can sort of keep up the small things that I'm doing and keep up the interesting stuff, and then use that to inform the decisions down the track of which major games I'm focusing on. So I'm hoping that that's going to be something interesting. But I do want to say that it has been a massive honor and a massive pleasure to be involved with this community over the past 4-ish years. I guess it's been. I don't really have the words to express how much the support and well wishes I've had from people have meant to me. It's been surprisingly moving, and I hope that that whatever comes of what I'm focusing on now is stuff that that people can enjoy and appreciate. Excuse me.
I would just like to apologize for being the straw that broke the camel's back here.
I couldn't handle it, you know. We had you on, and yep, that was the peak. Decided it was time to go. But yeah, so on tech news, there's been a not really much GeoNext information out there, but apparently there's going to be a lot more at GDC. So I guess we'll talk about that next show.
But one important thing here is the original rough hosted session is invite only or some higher tier pass. These sessions you can apparently go into if you manage to get in line early enough and get into the room. So if you are, for whatever reason, at GDC, you can try to get in there.
Sweet. So our good friend Flibbit has a new port that's just come out. Flibbit, do you want to just join in and tell us about it?
Yeah, I'm here. So Bleed, we shipped it last night. Basically just because both of us were like, we may as well. And I started it last Saturday, which is actually, if you're thinking that's a short time, it's actually longer than I expected because it was almost a speed port candidate actually. Because it's actually 100% content compatible. I actually didn't change any of the content. And almost none of the code changed. It was only like I made some if-defs for a Steam build, and then I think I changed the mouse code a little bit just because of how I like to have my games behave with the mouse. But other than that, had the source code not been on Dropbox and totally screwed up the case sensitivity, I probably could have done a speed port of it.
Oh dear.
It could have probably. It might have been my sub 60 port because the only thing I would have had to do is add an arbitrary net namespace, and it would have been the sub 60 port. And I was so mad because it's like, it works out of the box. It's so frustrating because, for those who don't know, one of the things I do for my library called FNA is I just take random games that are open source and they use XNA, and I just port them as fast as I humanly can. And my current personal best time is 78 seconds from Windows to Linux, having never seen the source code or the content. And I'm hoping to get that to sub 60 by FNA 1.0, but we'll see. And I'm really mad that Bleed couldn't be it, because that's actually like the one I would have put on the site. But maybe another port will be that one, and it'll be sub 60 with no changes to the source at all. We'll see.
Well, there's another great example of what Ryan was talking about earlier about, you know, you nail the tools, and that helps you in the long run. You know, it makes your porting process easier.
Yeah, there's always and Bleed's definitely a case of speaking about the game itself, it's actually pretty cool. I actually hadn't played it until I started porting it, and then I actually got to play it, and it's actually really cool, like bullet hell shooter. But yeah, it took a while to get to 78 seconds, and then there's one more game I'm working on right now that is a giant. It is huge. It's probably, if you think of just like the 6,000-pound gorilla of XNA games, you could probably pick it out in a list if you just put like a list together and just guessed. And I'm hoping that would be sort of the benchmark that says, this is how good FNA is. It took 2.5 years to get here, but this will be it, and it'll be pretty awesome. But
2.5 years.
until then, I'm just doing little things like Bleed. Well, yeah, I started it in January 2013 based on Monogame as like a branch that I thought I would never touch again. And then I just kept rewriting everything, and now I just had to rename it to FNA, both for just like technical concerns and recently legal concerns. I wanted to call it FXNA just for my own personal enjoyment, but then the trademark concern came up again, so I was like, well, I could still get away with FNA. So if you're wondering, that actually is very much deliberate, but you know.
What a tease.
Well, nice work, dude.
Yeah, hopefully I'll have at least one or two more before that big one, depending on who will let me port their stuff. Because when I kind of pitched the idea of like, hey, I could get this for you like over the weekend, they're like, are you sure? And then going back to what Ryan was saying, my code's terrible, that'll never happen. I'm like, I probably won't even look at the source, just to let you know.
Sweet.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
So if you know any XNA games, send them to me, and I'll get them ported.
We mentioned earlier that Don't Starve Together has Linux support, so we can cross that one off the list. That's cool. Dead Island has had an update.
Yes, they fixed the loot issues and reduced the executable size. It's no longer 900 some megabytes large because they forgot to strip it.
Whoops.
Yes, oops, but I think they also fixed that stupid repair bug. You can now repair everything up to 100% again, which was also a problem. So yeah, overall not a big update, but fixed some of the more nagging issues that the game still had. Now if they could do the same to Dying Light, that would be great.
So there's a little game that I only became aware of recently, which is coming out on February the 25th, called A Good Snowman is Hard to Build. Any of you guys heard of this?
I saw it coming up on SteamDB, I think, but I've never heard of it before.
So it's this sort of Sokoban-like type thing, and it is incredibly cute. You play this little monster thing that has to roll balls of snow around. If you roll it through the snow, the ball will gain size, and so you've got to get the size of the balls right to build a proper snowman. And then once you build a snowman, it gets a name, and you can give it a hug, and then you move on to the next puzzle. I had no idea that anybody could make Sokoban type puzzles this charming. You know, I thought Cogs was kind of the limit with its interpretation of sliding block puzzles, but this is insane.
Yeah, it looks really good.
So if anybody's excited by that, then yeah, 25th. Hand of Fate, which we've mentioned a couple times previously, is now available. It's out of early access and released on Steam, and I think there's a GOG version coming, and maybe a Humble version. I don't know about the Humble version, but I think...
There's already one on Humble, I think.
Oh, okay, well there we go. I thought...
But that might just be a Steam key, so who knows?
Yeah, I haven't looked at the Humble store yet. But that's fun. We got some bugs fixed at the last minute that fixed some rendering issues that were affecting some Linux users, so that was really cool to get sorted. And we're going to get the creative lead from Defiant Development to join us for a future episode of the cast. So if anybody's excited about that, keep an eye on it, check out the game, and we'll be coming back to that later.
Toonstruck is now available on GOG, and it has Linux support via ScumVM.
Hooray!
I do remember that game. It's a point-and-click adventure with a cartoon artist that gets sucked into a cartoon world where everything is super cute and really childish, but eventually it gets all messed up by some evil entity and a machine that turns everything wicked and evil. And the cow turns into a BDSM cow and stuff like that.
We did this for Game Club last year.
Was that the one with Christopher Lloyd?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
So apparently there's a possibility of a sequel. Apparently the story is that there was a lot more footage recorded than was used in the game, enough to build another game out of. And Keith Aram, one of the original developers, has the rights at the moment and has been trying to build momentum for a sequel to happen. So if you are super into Toonstruck, we can hope that it being revived on GOG is likely to lead to that sequel coming at some point. He's been tweeting telling people to stay tuned, if you can handle that pun. Also released has been the Book of Unwritten Tales 2. It's now complete and out of early access, is that right?
Yes, and as much as I can tell, it seems to be better received so far by the press. I know Metacritic isn't a good source, but it's a good handwrite above the previous games. Has any of you guys played it? Because I somehow think it's a terrible idea to play a linear point-and-click adventure in early access. So I have rated intentionally.
I didn't have the opportunity to check it out, no.
No, I haven't.
But it's up there on my to-buy list.
But I kind of like the idea. I mean, like, there are some games that I would be really excited to be able to sort of witness the evolution of and be kind of have that window into development of these kind of linear narratively driven games. And that's something that a lot of developers shy away from. I don't know if that's the direction that King Art have gone with this particular title, but if it is, then I totally that's a risky thing to do and totally applaud them for being brave enough to try it. There've been some more game updates. Metro Redux has apparently had some updates.
Yeah, both of them. Not much really. Fixed the bug on NVIDIA Optimus systems and some bug with a benchmarking tool that didn't let it save out to a file. A new SSAA anti-aliasing option, an even lower one. Instead of putting in a proper anti-aliasing mode, they just keep fiddling around with that one they have. And some hints for the overlay for the Steam controller, which is interesting concerning our previous talk. Do they actually have a new one, or are they doing it for the old one? Has anyone tested that?
I'd imagine from what we heard, it's probably the old one.
But yeah, nothing major really. And there have been patches for Dying Light. It's now up to version 1.4.0, and it's still not working properly on Linux. That's about the summary I'm going to give. I've seen another guy making an API trace in the Steam forums, and I don't know, Brian, you still around?
Yes.
You want to hold your horses? It seems like it can take up to 90k draw calls per frame.
That seems like a lot.
Wow.
That is a lot. And I don't know how they do it, but it's not surprising they are not getting any performance. They're apparently calling GL get error multiple times per frame.
Oh.
Which they apparently shouldn't be doing even once in released code. So it's a bit of a crap fest, to be honest.
Yeah, GL gets you kind of have to, if you really have to have certain data, you have to either do it once and never again, or you just have to cache everything, which is also really sketchy. Like, I mean, I remember we were in Capsized. That's a 2D game that was running 90,000 GL calls, and I managed to get it down to like 2,000, and it's like, oh, it doesn't run at 6 frames per second anymore. So yeah, 90k even for a big title is kind of much.
That's actually really common too when you're first moving from Direct 3D. I don't know where they started, but it's very normal to be like, we made this look exactly call for call like the Direct 3D stuff, and now it's it's really slow and we don't know why. And the answer is you gotta not do some of the things you're doing. Like if they're still doing like GL get error calls and stuff, those are common at the start, and those are all fixable things. So it's not an uncommon story you're hearing right now.
Yep.
I heard they had a lot of performance issues even on Windows, so it sounds like it's still kind of a work in progress game there.
That is true. Some people have theorized that they weren't properly culling at all, so that everything was always rendered, which might also contribute to the high draw calls. But that's just speculation, so let's hope we are still seeing more patches, which I believe they have actually opened up a semi-open beta you could apply for, and I don't know, Lime from Gaming on Linux might be in it. He's around here at the moment, isn't he?
I think he just left.
He was, but no, yeah, sad. But they are always putting out the patches for both systems, for Windows and Linux. They are never doing any special treatment just for Windows because it's a more important platform, which is nice of them. They have a lot of problems, but they're addressing them at the same speed they're addressing Windows problems. So it's not like, here's your afterthought platform, now deal with it.
Yeah, so it'll improve over time. It's just going to take a while. So I guess we just got a release date announced for Cities Skylines, which is pretty exciting to me. Last few sim-style games on any platform have been pretty disappointing, so it sounds like these guys are really trying to push for a classic SimCity-style game. And it looks pretty good. And I guess it'll have a release on every platform. At least that's what they said for the March 10th date, so that'll be great.
Yeah, it looks pretty exciting. I'm looking forward to checking that out. On to crowdfunding news, something that we nearly touched on for the last show, and after reading up on it, decided not to. Underworld Ascendant has moved Linux support from a stretch goal into a base deliverable with a expected delay in the Linux release, which is kind of nice move on their part.
Absolutely, it's a smart move.
Over the last time when we were deciding to not talk about it, we had discovered that it was running on an engine that already supported Linux, and that if they were at the beginning of development, then they could make the middleware decisions to avoid having significant hurdles to doing a Linux build, and the overheads would really kind of only end up being kind of QA and testing and stuff, which don't really seem to warrant a stretch goal to some of us. So very nice of them to listen and move on that front. For anybody who's not aware, that's a whole bunch of ex or former Looking Glass Studios people come back together to make another Ultima game. Or Ultima Underworld game.
Well, but they don't have the license, right? They are just calling it Underworld Ascendant.
Oh, okay. Sorry, you're right. You are correct. But yeah, they're making something in the style of Ultima Underworld.
So yeah, if you're interested in that, check it out. Consider funding it. Don't sell your house to do it.
And as we were saying earlier, actually, were we saying this in the show earlier? No, we were saying this before about unrelated stuff. When you back something, think about whether or not you believe in the people. If you don't believe in the people, don't back it, no matter how good the idea sounds. So if you love these people and you want to support these people to try and make a game, then throw your money at it. And enjoy.
I would also argue, if you do really support the idea, sometimes it can be worth putting the money to it just to show that there is support for the idea, even if those particular people aren't able to follow through on it. And I think that was a big deal, like right after SimCity from EA came out, and people were saying, this isn't the SimCity we want, and there was a Kickstarter to do a game that was like it, but more in tradition of SimCity, and eventually it folded, but the amount of attention it drew was enough to wake up a lot of people and saying, hey, we can really do this.
So
Yeah. Did anybody else have anything recent that they'd like to talk about that they've seen happening? Ryan, DerRidda, Nemoder?
Nope.
Nope. Flip it?
I was working on Bleed this week, so I didn't see much.
It's been a quiet week then. And I think the show has gone on long enough. We need to pronounce last rites on it.
Well, certainly amazing having you on the show, Ryan. That's always awesome to hear from you because of all the stuff you've done. It's just been amazing for us.
Thank you. I had a good time.
Cheers. It's been a pleasure, and if you ever want to come back and chat with us again, I'm sure we can work something out.
this might absolutely be interesting to do when we actually have the power of hindsight to talk about how Steam machines have impacted Linux gaming and stuff like that.
Mm.
Oh, that could be like one long apology. I don't know if I want to review previous tapes.
Something that I missed from the chat earlier, somebody was asking what your favorite game is and what you do to relax, whether that's whether gaming is included in that or whether it's just work for you.
All the games I like are really, really old school games. Like I'll still pull out like the Dreamcast and play like Ikaruga or something like that, or Crazy Taxi or something. Usually when I'm trying to play a modern game, I'm trying to find something a little bit more story driven now, a little less twitchy. I used to love the twitchy games. That's like the Super Meat Boy type things. I still do like them, but when I relax, I want to be I want to feel something instead of just adrenaline. I want to feel like the way that Gone Home made me feel, or The Walking Dead makes me feel, or something like that. So those are more the games I focus towards now, and I've become kind of an aficionado of like walking simulators, but it's kind of how I roll right now.
That was John that asked that, by the way. And I see someone in chat is asking if you can port Ikaruga.
Oh god, I would fucking love to port that game. Treasure, call me. I would port that in a second. I would love to port that game.
So there you go. If anybody has any contacts at Treasure, get them in touch with Ryan. But on that note, we might wrap up the show. Again, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you very much. I had fun too.
And as always, people can send us feedback to cast@steamlug.org. They can send us tweets to @steamlug. They can find us on Google Plus and harass us there as well. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Oh, and you can find me on Twitter at @Iculus, and check out for my Patreon or something showing up.
Yeah, that too. Is that something you're seriously moving towards?
I'm thinking about it. We'll see. I might pull the trigger. We'll find out. Follow me on Twitter. You can listen for updates.
Yay!
Is this what you've been installing like Red Hat for, like Red Hat 6 for or something?
Actually, yes, and you'll find out about that later.
Oh, good.
It's a good story. Have me on again. I'll tell it to you.
I did notice that you were lamenting the lack of a software category on Patreon.
Yeah, I'm experimenting with the idea, but I might not actually launch it. It's just something I'm toying around with. But we can talk about that in a later episode if you want.
Sweet. Oh, bye.
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 Goodbye.
Now that we stopped
Wow.
recording, I can now yell at Ryan about Mojo Shader. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm so sorry. I'll get to it. I promise.